Hey guys, let's take a journey back in time tonight. We're going to wander back almost 700 years to an age where warmth meant everything, where it meant survival, and where the wind seemed to whisper its way right through stone. Imagine you're standing before a medieval castle, deep in the heart of winter. Its towers are trimmed with frost, the flags hanging from them frozen stiff with ice. Inside, a few hundred people are huddled together behind walls thicker than your arms are long, all of them praying the firewood holds out until spring. You can almost smell the cold, can't you? It's sharp, like iron, and damp with the scent of old stone, all of it threaded through with wood smoke. The air itself feels like it could shatter if you took a breath too quickly. You probably wouldn't make it through this, not without a few serious layers and a very loyal cook with a cauldron of hot stew. So before you get too settled in, maybe take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy what we do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I always love knowing who's awake with me out there in the world. Now dim the lights. The snow is falling, heavy on the battlements, a soft, quiet blanketing the courtyard down below. You step through the gatehouse, past the portcullis as it groans in the cold. You can see the guards stamping their feet, just trying to keep the blood flowing, their breath curling out into little ghosts. The castle's stones feel like they hold the chill in, like a memory, years and years of winters, all stacked one on top of the other. There's a faint dripping sound echoing down the corridor, where icicles are clinging to the arches like daggers made of glass. You move slowly, feeling the rough grit of frost under your boots. Out in the Great Bailey, servants are hurrying between the storerooms, their arms full of firewood bundles, their faces wrapped up in wool. Somewhere off in the stables, a horse snorts, and its breath steams in the air. The whole world smells of hay, soot, and wet leather. Everything gets dampened in winter, the colours, the laughter. Even time itself seems to slow down. Inside the keep, torches sputter against the drafts that sneak their way through cracks in the limestone. Historians still go back and forth about whether these castles were the incredible marvels of defence they're made out to be, or if they were just glorified refrigerators for the upper class. The truth is, they were both. They were built for power, for permanence, not for comfort. Warmth was never the mason's specialty. Each wall, some of them 10 feet thick, was designed to keep invaders out, but it also kept the cold locked firmly in. You touch the wall with your gloved hand and you can almost feel its pulse, slow, ancient, completely indifferent. Just try to imagine heating a place like this. Fires would be roaring in every single hearth, and still, the upper floors would stay icy cold. Smoke crawled along the rafters, seeping into the tapestries and into everyone's hair. The people, they just adapted. They learned the language of endurance, of layering up, of huddling together and laughing in spite of it all. They figured out how to make winter a ritual instead of just a punishment. Overhead, you can see snow filtering through the arrow slits, dusting the stairwell in a fine white powder. You climb carefully, the steps worn slick from centuries of boots. The sound of distant bells drifts over from the chapel tower. Down below, servants are spreading fresh rushes across the floor, straw mixed with herbs like lavender or mint, trying to cover up some of the less pleasant smells. And here's a strange detail for you. In the really cold years, those rushes would freeze right to the floor. People would just walk over them until spring finally came. A raven lands on the parapet, shaking the snow from its wings. It lets out a call that sounds almost like it's mocking you before it leaps into the white sky. You can just imagine being a lookout up here, all alone at dawn, wrapped in furs that are stiff with frost, just watching the forest beyond the walls blur under the falling snow. An isolation like that used to mean survival. The higher the wall, the safer the soul inside, but it also meant that warmth only came from other humans, from their breath, their stories, their stubborn good cheer. Far below, the moat lies still, half frozen. Nobody dares to get water from it now. It's just too dangerous, too brittle. Instead, they hack buckets of ice out of barrels, melting it slowly by the hearth. The castle smells of smoke, tallow candles, and a whole lot of humanity all cooped up together. You might wrinkle your nose at it, but you have to remember, the medieval nose found comfort in these familiar, musky smells: wood smoke, wet wool, and stew simmering somewhere deep in the kitchens. You walk along the battlements where the guards are shuffling from side to side just to stay warm, their cloaks whipping around in the wind. One of them is gnawing on a crust of bread that's gone as hard as a brick. Another one is muttering about his next watch, wishing he was a monk with a warm cell and a full belly. And here's a little tidbit for you. Some castles actually hired firewatch boys to patrol the corridors at night. They'd carry these long poles and poke the embers in the hearths back to life, just tiny moving sparks in a vast sea of stone. The sun never gets very high these days. You can feel how short the daylight is in your bones. Every single hour of brightness has to be used for something. Repairs, gathering wood, tending to the livestock in the outer bailey. After the sun sets, the castle turns into this half-lit labyrinth where sounds carry in strange ways. A cough echoing from a stairwell, the shuffle of rats in the walls, the whisper of someone saying a prayer before they go to bed. Now just pause for a second. Feel the weight of that stillness. The world outside might be frozen solid, but inside these walls, life just keeps pulsing along, measured by fires, by meals, and by the ticking drip of melting snow coming through the roof. In the corner of the courtyard, there's a snow-covered tree, maybe the only birch, that managed to root itself between the stones. It reminds you of something fragile, something that's thriving against all the odds. That's what winter in a castle was all about. It didn't demand grandeur, it demanded endurance disguised as grace. You start to wander back toward the hall, your footprints trailing behind you, erased by the wind almost as soon as you make them. A servant hurries past with an armful of kindling, murmuring a greeting in a dialect you can barely understand. The human voice sounds so soft in here, swallowed up by all the echo and the frost. But then, somewhere deeper inside, laughter erupts. It's muted, but it's alive. And so you cross the threshold of this fortress, not as a conqueror, but as a guest, invited to see how people survived in the harshest season of beauty. Their lives were stitched together with courage, with superstition, and a very good sense of timing when it came to finding the warmest spot by the fire. As the great doors close behind you, shutting out the moan of the wind, you realize you're at the beginning of a long, cold story. The kind that's told not by the victors, but by the survivors, the builders, the cooks, the knights, and the dreamers who all learned how to find comfort in a world made of stone and snow. The wooden doors groan as they swing shut behind you, sealing out that shrieking wind. The air inside the great hall feels thick, heavy with wood smoke, the smell of mutton grease, and a faint sweetness coming from the ale casks. Your eyes adjust slowly, tracing the dancing orange light that's spilling from the hearth at the far end. It's enormous, a blazing square of flame that's big enough to roast an entire ox. Sparks are just tumbling upward like gold dust. This right here is the heart of the castle, the place where warmth, conversation, and status all collide. You walk across the rush-strewn floors and they crunch faintly under your boots. Every few steps you pass benches crowded with people, servants, guards, children, each one of them stretching their hands out toward the glow. The closer they get to sit by the fire, the higher their rank seems to be. The nobles are basking right near the center, their cloaks lined with expensive fur. The lower servants just kind of hover at the edges, half stuck in the shadows. You can smell both money and manure in here, the perfumes and the sweat of hierarchy all mingled together in one humid breath. The Great Hall wasn't just a place for eating. It was the medieval world's living room, its courtroom, and its gossip hub, all rolled into one. On feast days, its rafters would have shimmered with banners and candlelight. But on long winter nights like this one, it becomes more like a smoky cave of survival. The air is humming with low chatter, the sound of knives scraping on trenchers of bread, and a lute being plucked somewhere near the dais. You drift a little closer to the fire. Its heat bites at your face, but it never quite seems to reach your back. That was always the problem with medieval heating. It was all or nothing. You had a blazing inferno in front of you and a bone-deep chill right behind you. Historians still debate whether castle architects really understood anything about airflow, or if they just built what looked impressive. Some will claim that certain high chimneys and corner vents were actually early experiments in ventilation. Others say they were just decorative flukes, completely useless against the drafts. The lord of the castle is sitting high up on a carved chair, underneath a painted canopy. His expression is half boredom, half benevolent authority, the look of a man who's used to being both revered and ignored at the same time. Beside him, his lady sips spiced wine from a pewter cup, her fingers heavy with rings. Their shadows loom up behind them like a pair of patient ghosts. Servants are weaving through the crowd, carrying wooden platters piled high with food that smells a lot richer than it probably tastes. Salted beef as tough as leather, boiled turnips, and pies thick with some kind of mystery meat. You notice a cook near the hearth, sweating right through her linen cap. She's been feeding this fire since dawn, shoveling in logs with the rhythm of a prayer. The wood hisses and spits, it's mostly oak, though good hardwood is starting to get scarce. There's laughter now, loud and sudden, a little bit drunk. A bard has started telling a tale about a knight who mistook his own shadow for a dragon. The whole hall roars with amusement. You can almost feel the collective relief in the sound. Laughter means warmth, and warmth means life. The sound just fills the beams and the stones, pushing back against the winter. Overhead, the ceiling arches up into darkness. Every now and then, a puff of smoke just lingers up there, trapped before it can escape through the louver, a wooden vent in the roof that opens to the sky. In theory, the smoke is supposed to go out. In practice, it curls back down again, stinging everyone's eyes and staining the tapestries. That's probably why medieval people's lungs weren't in the best shape. Still, they accepted it. Smoke meant safety. It meant a roof over your head, a fire, and enough food to get through the night. In the far corner, a few men are gambling with carved dice made of bone. One of them is missing a few fingers, frostbitten from a winter long ago. He laughs anyway, tossing his winnings into a little leather pouch. You have to wonder what they dream about when the fire dies down low. Maybe they dream of summer, or maybe just of another full belly. You take a seat near the wall where the heat barely reaches. The stone behind you feels damp. Someone hands you a wooden cup of ale, and the warmth from it just seeps into your hands. The taste is rough and yeasty, like it's half drink, half bread. And here's an interesting little tidbit. Historians have found that the ale people consumed in winter was often much thicker, almost closer to a porridge than a liquid. It was both food and drink at the same time, just calorie-dense comfort in a world that didn't have hot cocoa or central heating. A serving boy passes by with a candle stub, lighting fresh tallow lamps that are set all along the walls. Their glow is uneven, yellow and trembling, but it does soften the gloom a little. The smell, however, is a bit less charming. It's the smell of animal fat melting into smoke. but no one complains. It's the scent of home. Someone near you starts humming an old carol. The melody is simple and a little sad. The tune drifts upward, and it mingles with the crackle of the fire, the mutter of the dice, the distant bark of a hound. The castle feels alive now, like a single breathing thing made of stone, smoke, and voices. Then, almost as if on cue, the outer doors creak open again. A rush of icy air just swirls through the hall, snuffing out a few of the candles. A messenger enters, his cloak stiff with frost, snow melting onto the flagstones. All eyes turn toward him for a moment. He bows low to the Lord, delivers a parchment that's sealed with red wax, and then retreats toward the fire to thaw out his hands. The gossip starts up instantly. Who sent it? What's the news from the road? Did a rival lord's crops fail? Even in the middle of winter, information travels just like heat. The Lord breaks the seal, frowns for a second, then just waves for more wine. Whatever it was, he'll deal with it tomorrow. Tonight, the fire is burning high and the night is long. You lean back, just letting the sounds blur together into one soft hum. This was how medieval people survived the winter. It wasn't by comfort, but by community. Every laugh, every shared bowl of stew, every note of music was an act of defiance against the cold outside. They turned necessity into a ritual. Still, you can't help but notice how the shadows pool in the corners, how even the largest fire leaves half the hall in darkness. There's something oddly beautiful about it, the contrast, the flicker between warmth and chill, between life and sleep. You sip the last of your ale, and the world grows a little hazy with its warmth. Somewhere up above, a bat flutters near the beams. Somewhere down below, a hound sighs in its dreams. You can just imagine the same scene centuries ago, the same fire, the same laughter, the same quiet yearning for the sun to return. The stones have seen it all, and they've kept their secrets. When the fire finally cracks low, and the last servant banks the embers for the night, the hall will settle into silence. The heat will fade, replaced by a cool whisper. But for now, the warmth lingers, just enough to make you feel drowsy. The night outside can do its worst. Within these walls, humanity glows like a coal that just refuses to die. The fire's glow still clings to you as dawn starts to creep into the hall. The embers are smouldering, red as hidden rubies, while servants shuffle about, sweeping up last night's rushes. Your breath clouds in the chill. It really feels like waking up inside a stone lung. You can almost taste the cold. It's metallic and dry. Somewhere beyond the heavy curtains, a rooster braves the icy air with a single, defiant crow. Morning in a castle has begun, and you're about to find out just how people dressed to endure it. You head toward a big wooden screen that divides the great hall from the private chambers. Beyond it, you can hear the castle's inhabitants starting to stir. Nobles, squires, maids, all of them cocooning themselves in layers that would make our modern winter coats look like toys. You see, in medieval Europe, warmth wasn't some luxury, it was a strategy. Chroniclers from that time often said that a noble's wardrobe was his first fortress. You start with your own layers. First, a linen shirt, light but coarse, that never truly feels clean. Over that, a woolen tunic. And then another one, thicker, dyed in muted greens or browns, colours that were good at hiding the grime of daily life. Around your legs, hose cling like a second skin, held up by garters that cut faintly at your thighs. Then come the boots made of stiff leather, all cracked from old snow. Each layer is designed to trap what little warmth your own body can make. A curious little custom comes up here. Some people who lived in castles would stuff bits of rabbit fur between their garments, a kind of do-it-yourself insulation. It might sound ridiculous, but when the wind howled down the chimneys, any little bit of softness was a blessing. Archaeologists have even found remnants of feathers sewn into linings, basically down before down jackets were ever even a thing. A servant brings in a surcoat lined with fur for the lady of the house. The fur smells faintly musky, and you see the lady wrinkle her nose a little before she slips it on. She fastens it with a brooch that's shaped like a falcon, a small reminder that fashion still mattered, even when everyone's toes were numb. In a world of endless grey stone, colour was an act of defiance. Deep reds, indigos and gold trims gleamed against the monotony of the frost. But underneath all that elegance lay a harsh truth. These clothes weren't just for decoration, they were armour against misery. Contemporary accounts suggest that wool, the miracle fabric of the time, could keep even a damp cold at bay. It was woven thick and then felted. Sometimes it was even mixed with lanolin-rich grease to help repel moisture. Just imagine the scent. Part barnyard, part earth. It sounds odd, but it was probably comforting. Still, no amount of layering could completely erase the cold. In the servants' quarters, people just slept in the same clothes they wore during the day. Some of them even shared garments, taking turns while the other set hung by the fire, stiff as a board from frozen sweat. You might smile at this strange rotation of sleeves and leggings, but that was simply what survival looked like in January. Upstairs, in a small solar chamber, a maid is helping her mistress get dressed. The lady's hands are trembling just slightly as she ties her girdle. Her gown is heavy, trailing over the rushes on the floor. A bright girdle of woven silk cuts through the gloom, a rare luxury that was imported from the East. Nobody really knows for sure how many layers noble women wore, but one Italian chronicler joked that a lady of rank might just vanish inside her own clothes. You can almost hear the rustle of the fabric and the quiet sigh of exasperation. Meanwhile, down in the servants' wing, getting dressed is a totally different kind of ritual. A boy named Will pulls on a pair of hose that are patched with scraps of old sacking. He tightens his rope belt and rubs his arms briskly before stepping out into the yard. His breath forms little ghosts in the air. If he's lucky, he'll find a sheepskin to wrap around his shoulders later on. If not, he'll just have to work until the motion itself becomes his heat. And experts still argue about just how effective medieval winter wear really was. Some will argue that all that layering of natural fibres offered better insulation than we give it credit for. Others claim that most people just shivered their way right through the season. What's certain is that the poor felt it much more acutely than the lords whose furs lined entire trunks. One tax record from the time even notes that a small manor spent more on fur imports that year than it did on grain. That's a statement of priorities, perhaps, or maybe just vanity. Still, necessity bred a lot of creativity. In the kitchen, a scullery maid ties linen around her feet before she slips into her wooden clogs. The linen soaks up the moisture and helps prevent frostbite, a little trick that was passed down through generations. You can hear her humming, the melody quick and bright against the dull clang of the pots. She smells faintly of ash, soap, and onions. Outside, the first light is just hitting the courtyard. Steam is rising from the stables, where the grooms are brushing horses under a veil of frost. Their coats gleam, dark and sleek, releasing clouds of warmth that smell of hay and sweat. Sometimes the animals fared better than the humans. They're built for this. Yet even they get blankets stitched from rough wool that smell of smoke. In the armory, a squire is struggling with his chainmail. The metal bites at his fingers, colder than anything else in the whole castle. He mutters under his breath, breathing into his hands to warm them up. It takes time to layer himself up, the padded gambeson, the mail shirt, the surcoat. He looks like he's half warrior, half-walking furnace. A scholar once joked that knights didn't so much fight as they just slowly cooked inside their own armor. It's not that far from the truth. By mid-morning, the castle is alive with the rustling of fabrics and the creak of leather. You can hear the faint jingling of belts, the whisper of cloaks brushing against the stone. The sounds all blend together like music, a symphony of cloth, weight, and motion. It's the language of survival played out in wool and fur. Even the small accessories carried meaning. Gloves that were lined with squirrel fur were prized, both for their warmth and for their status. Woolen hats that were shaped like hoods, known as chaperones, framed faces against the biting wind. Some people even stuffed dried herbs like rosemary or thyme into their collars, believing that the scent could guard against winter sickness. It's a strange but touching detail, the hope that a smell itself could be a kind of shield. You pause by the fire one more time, tugging your cloak a little tighter. The smoke makes your eyes water. Everyone here looks slightly puffy from it, their cheeks ruddy with the cold. Yet beneath all the discomfort, there's a sense of pride. To be well dressed in winter wasn't just about comfort. It was civilization's small victory over nature. Outside, the snow begins to fall again, gentle but relentless. You glance up at the battlements, imagining the guards up there in their thick cloaks, their faces red and raw. Down below, the servants are still hurrying about, their breath pluming like incense, and you, wrapped in centuries of fabric and resilience, you begin to understand something quietly profound. Warmth in a medieval castle was never just a given. It was earned, it was layered, and it was fiercely, fiercely kept. The moment you step away from the orange glow of the hearth, that chill just folds right over you again. It's slow, invisible, almost personal. It slips down your collar and curls itself around your ribs. The castle's walls, which look so thick and majestic from the outside, they turn into traitors from within. They sweat with dampness, they hum with the wind, and they leak cold like sieves. You can almost hear the air sighing through unseen cracks. You walk along a corridor that twists around the inner keep, its flagstones polished smooth by centuries of passing feet. A faint mist just hovers near the floor. Your breath meets it halfway. Each torch you pass sputters as a draft steals its flame and pulls it sideways. The smell is an odd cocktail, old smoke, wet plaster, and the mineral tang of stone that's seen just too many winters. We know from surviving building accounts that medieval masons were absolute masters of fortification, but they were novices when it came to insulation. They knew how to keep arrows out, but not the wind. Even the finest castles, the ones you see admired in illuminated manuscripts, were notorious for their drafts. To live in one was to live at the mercy of tiny little holes and vast walls that just refused to warm up. You run your hand along the stone, feeling the moisture gather under your glove. During a frost, that condensation would become ice, forming delicate white filigree between the blocks of limestone. At dawn, these crystals would melt into thin little streams that trickled down the walls, pooling under beds and chests. Sometimes the rushes on the floor would freeze solid overnight, turning the rooms into slippery little ponds of straw and ice. Oddly enough, there was a medieval superstition that drafts carried illness, what they used to call evil airs. To ward them off, people would hang tapestries or heavy curtains over the doorways. It wasn't really for decoration, though they were beautiful, but as a kind of primitive insulation. Just imagine the shimmer of woven gold thread catching the torchlight, hiding not just the cold, but the walls themselves. You duck beneath one of these curtains and enter a smaller room. A brazier is glowing weakly in the center, fed with bits of charcoal and pine cones. The air in here feels marginally softer, though it still bites at your nose. Beside the brazier sits a steward, wrapped in a cloak the colour of soot. He's rubbing beeswax into a window frame, muttering something about keeping out the devil's breath. The glass panes are these tiny, diamond-shaped slivers held in by lead. Most of them are frosted completely opaque. What little sunlight there is just seeps through like honey through cloth, and experts are still divided on whether medieval builders really understood anything about heat retention. Some argue that they experimented with double shutters and wall hangings as a kind of rudimentary insulation. Others insist that these were just aesthetic gestures that were masquerading as innovation. What's undeniable is that people got creative. Some would even stuff moss into the gaps around the doors, while poorer folks would smear a mix of mud and horsehair to stop the wind. It was primitive caulking, if you like. A servant passes by carrying a copper basin of steaming water. You can see the vapour vanish almost instantly into the chill. She tells you, half amused, half resigned, that warm water never stays warm for longer than a prayer's length. In the kitchen, they just boil it again and again, just to feel the illusion of heat on their hands. Her breath smells faintly of ale and smoke, and her fingers are raw, the skin cracked like old parchment. In the Lord's chamber, up above, luxury takes a different shape. The bed, a massive oak structure, stands on a dais to escape the cold that's seeping up from the floor. Thick curtains surround it, trapping body heat in a private little world. The linens are rough but plentiful, layered with fur throws, fox, wolf, or whatever the last hunt yielded. When the couple sleeps, their combined warmth fogs up the canopy until droplets form and fall softly through the night. It sounds romantic, perhaps, until one of them wakes up damp and shivering. And here's a curious architectural habit. Castle fireplaces were often built really wide but shallow. They were designed less to radiate warmth and more to display wealth. The bigger the opening, the more impressive the fire, but also the more heat was lost straight up the chimney. It was a medieval paradox, showing off your power while you were freezing in style. One chronicle from northern England describes a castle that was so cold that icicles formed on the inside of the chapel font. The priest had to break them off every single morning before Mass. You can just picture him there, swinging his censer, the incense smoke curling through the clouds of his own breath, determined to keep heaven's chill at bay. If you pause right now, you can hear how sound travels in this place. A cough in a lower hall echoes like thunder. Footsteps from above bloom into whispers down below. The architecture magnifies not warmth, but presence. Maybe that's why people filled all the silence with chatter or music or prayer. It made the space feel inhabited, less like a tomb of stone. Somewhere in the kitchen wing, a door bangs shut. A gust of wind rushes through the corridor, scattering a few loose feathers from the floor rushes. You shiver instinctively, pulling your cloak a little closer. The cold isn't cruel, it's just patient. It seeps, it waits, it hums. The people who lived here must have known that you couldn't fight it forever. You could only outlast it. And to do that, they built habits. Fires were tended from dawn until dusk. Windows were shuttered before the sun set. Woolen hangings were checked daily for damp, because moisture bred mould, and mould bred sickness. The castle became a living organism, and every servant was its immune system, patching, feeding, and breathing warmth wherever they could. Even the animals played their part. Cats would curl up near the hearths to deter the mice that were nibbling at the stored grain. Dogs would sprawl out near the kitchen fire, doubling as heaters for the staff. You might find it strange, but there are letters describing lords who allowed their favourite hounds to sleep in bed with them, not for affection, but for warmth. By the afternoon, the castle smells of smoke and humanity. The windows are glowing amber from the low sun, and the air trembles with the constant crackle of fires. You notice how your eyes are stinging slightly, your throat dry from all the soot. Everyone here breathes the same air, stale, warm in patches and icy in others. Yet there's a rhythm to it. Each breath feels like it's been earned. You make your way to a narrow staircase, spiraling upward. At the top, the wind greets you like an old, rude friend. Through an arrow slit, you can glimpse the snow swirling across the fields, catching in the hollows of the roofs. The cold landscape below seems endless, but the castle, for all its flaws, stands steady, a defiant ember in a world of white. You exhale, watching your breath dissolve. Somewhere deep inside the keep, another fire flares to life. The cycle just continues, drafts, drips, shivers and sparks. It's all part of the strange symphony of medieval survival. And though your fingers ache and your nose burns, you can't help but admire the quiet dignity of it all. People just refusing to surrender to a season that wanted to take everything. By the time the afternoon light fades to a bluish kind of haze, the castle's rhythm shifts toward its favorite comfort: food. Somewhere deep beneath the main hall, a door creaks open and a blast of fragrant heat just rolls up the stairs. You follow your nose down into the bowels of the keep, where the castle's truest heart is beating. Not in the chapel, not in the bedchamber, but in the kitchen. It's a cavernous space, alive with the shimmer of firelight and the hiss of boiling pots. Smoke lingers thick under the rafters, curling around iron hooks that dangle like crooked fingers. You can almost taste the salt in the air, sharp and familiar. A cauldron the size of a barrel is hanging over the main hearth, bubbling with something that's halfway between a stew and a glue. Beside it, a cook is stirring slowly with a paddle that looks like it might have once been part of a ship's oar. We know from surviving inventories that winter dining was less about variety and more about endurance. Once the harvest ended and the ground froze solid, every single meal depended on the wisdom, or maybe the luck, of last autumn's storage. Salted pork, smoked fish, dried beans, onions strung from the beams like garlands. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept bellies full and spirits alive. You edge a little closer to a table where a young apprentice is rolling out dough. His hands are moving quickly, practiced, leaving little storms of flour in the air. He's making trenchers, flat rounds of bread that were used as both a plate and a meal. They'll soak up all the grease and sauce, and then they'll be tossed to the dogs or to the poor waiting outside the gate. Waste wasn't a sin here. It was a currency of generosity. A curious little practice catches your eye. Near the wall, strings of herbs are hanging, drying in the heat. Rosemary, sage, marjoram, even lavender. Cooks used them not only for flavor, but to mask the tang of meat that had aged a little beyond its prime. Some of them even stuffed cloves into joints of mutton before roasting, believing the spice drove out the cold humors. The smell is oddly comforting, like a memory of summer that's been trapped in the smoke. A steward passes by, marking items on a wax tablet. He's muttering about the salt stores running low, about needing more barrels from the coast. Salt was gold in the winter. It kept everything alive. One single barrel could preserve enough pork to feed 30 mouths. Without it, meat spoiled fast, and sickness spread even faster. Experts are still divided on just how well medieval preservation methods actually worked. Some argue that the constant salting stripped the food of its nutrients. Others point to evidence of surprisingly advanced curing techniques. Whatever the case, the taste was never subtle. You'd wake up from a meal thirsty enough to drink from the moat. You lean against a cool wall, just watching the choreography unfold. Servants are ladling broth, sharpening knives, fanning the fire with leather bellows. The air is just humming with clatter and chatter. Someone drops a spoon, it clinks, and then laughter erupts. These kitchens weren't quiet or genteel. They were engines of survival, noisy and very, very human. In the corner, a spit boy is turning the roasting meat by hand. His job is as thankless as it sounds. Hours spent facing the flames, his eyes streaming from the heat. Yet he's humming softly, tapping his foot to a rhythm that only he can hear. A parchment on a shelf nearby lists what the week's feasts will include: venison pie, eel stew, almond pudding. It's written in an elegant but smoky script, the ink all smudged with grease. Oddly enough, there was a folk belief that eating white foods in winter, milk, almonds, fish, kept one's complexion fair and their spirit pure. Meanwhile, the peasants outside the walls were gnawing on rye bread and dried peas, just praying their teeth would hold out. The difference between the classes could be measured in spices. Someone offers you a taste from a ladle. It's barley stew thick with turnips. It burns your tongue, but the flavor just blooms, earthy and sweet. You can feel it travel down your chest like a small torch. Around you, the cooks are chattering about shortages, gossiping about the Lord's mood, and teasing one another about whose stew could revive a frozen corpse. For a moment, you completely forget the grey world up above. On a side table, a row of earthenware jars are gleaming in the firelight. Honey, vinegar, lard, each one carefully hoarded. The head cook taps one of them and smiles. "Our treasure room," she says. She isn't joking. To lose these was to lose control over the winter. Above the hearth, bundles of dried apples and pears are swaying gently in the updraft. Some of them are so shriveled they look like tiny little faces grinning at your hunger. A dog is dozing near the ashes, his ears twitching each time someone drops a bone. If you close your eyes, you can map the whole castle just by its smells. Damp stone upstairs, cold iron in the armory, and down here, life. The scent of meat and wood smoke just wraps around you like a blanket. It's no wonder people lingered down here long after the day's meal was done. When the food is finally ready, the servants begin the grand migration upward. Platters are lifted shoulder high. They weave through the corridors on their way to the great hall. The procession is solemn but quick. The cold in the hall will rob the dishes of their warmth before they even reach the table. You trail behind them, catching the faint shimmer of fat in the torchlight. Back in the hall, the fire is blazing anew. The lord and lady are presiding just as before, but now the room is humming with energy. Platters arrive, steaming. More candles are lit. Voices rise. That first bite of hot food is a small triumph over winter. You can see it in their faces, relief mixed with satisfaction, as though they've beaten the season at its own game for one more day. But even here, in the glow of the feasting, hunger remains like a shadow at the edge of the light. Outside, the peasants in the nearby village are eating crusts beside weak fires. Within these walls, all this abundance feels almost guilty, almost holy. It's a performance of survival, repeated year after year. As the last scraps vanish and the cups are refilled with warm ale, someone begins to sing. The melody curls through the smoke like a ribbon, low, rhythmic, ancient. You lean back feeling full, drowsy and strangely at peace. For all its hardship, the medieval winter had moments like this, when the world outside froze solid, but inside humanity remembered how to glow. Morning breaks pale and brittle, the kind of light that seems to crack rather than shine. You wake up to that unmistakable chill of stone that has completely forgotten what warmth feels like. Somewhere down the corridor, a bucket tips over, followed by a curse that's muffled by the distance. It's time to face one of the least glamorous sides of castle life, the question of hygiene when water turns to ice and the air just stings your skin. You follow a servant who's carrying a wooden pail that sloshes with a thin layer of ice on top. Her breath curls behind her like a banner. She knocks on a heavy oak door and vanishes inside a chamber where steam immediately clouds the air. The faint smell that drifts out isn't perfume, but vinegar and ashes. In a medieval castle, cleanliness was measured in effort, not in outcome. We know from household manuals of the period that most people did not bathe very often. It wasn't because they didn't want to, but because winter made water an enemy. Heating it required firewood, which was precious. Bathing risked sickness, or so people thought. The chill that followed a bath was feared more than the grime that came before it. Even kings limited themselves to just a handful of baths each year, while peasants might have counted themselves lucky to sit in a steaming tub once a season. There is, however, a curious little detail. In some noble houses, bathing became a kind of ceremony. Wooden tubs lined with linen were filled with water that was perfumed with herbs. Servants would pour in rose petals or crushed thyme, claiming it chased away the evil airs. Musicians sometimes played nearby to distract from the awkwardness of sitting naked in a cold chamber that smelled faintly of damp wood. You can just imagine the laughter, the self-conscious chatter, the quick rush to dry off before all the steam vanished. A maid appears carrying a chamber pot. She walks briskly, her eyes down. The pot is earthenware, glazed but chipped. Its contents will soon join the line of buckets waiting to be emptied outside the gate. In winter, the simple act of disposal becomes treacherous. The stairs freeze over. The ground becomes slick. More than one unlucky servant has met with disaster trying to dump waste into the moat. Some scholars still debate whether castles truly stank as badly as popular myth suggests. Archaeological evidence from guardrobe shafts shows that waste was often directed into cesspits that were lined with stone, a small marvel of medieval engineering. Yet even the best designs had their limits. The cold weather slowed down decay, and the smell of ammonia was as common as the tolling of the bells. You find yourself near a narrow corridor that leads to the castle's privy. The door is half open, revealing a wooden bench with a hole that drops down into darkness. The air is sharp, oddly clean, as if the cold itself has frozen the scent. A torch burns weakly on the wall and frost glitters on the iron hinges. You have to think about how courage comes in small acts, like sitting still in this place when the temperature is biting right through your wool. Nearby, in a separate alcove, a woman is washing linens. Her hands are red all the way to the wrist, her knuckles cracked. She dips the cloth into water that's gone grey with lye soap, wrings it out, and hangs it before the hearth. Steam rises briefly before the fabric just stiffens up again. She's humming softly, a tune without any words. Every single drop of that water had to be hauled up from a frozen well, chipped from the ice, and then boiled in a pot that leaves soot all over her sleeves. Contemporary records mention that castles often employed full-time water carriers, their backs bent from all the labour. They trudged up staircases countless times a day. One chronicler in Burgundy wrote admiringly of a servant who could carry 2 full pails without spilling a single drop, even when the steps were as slick as glass. You can almost see him now, his breath clouding, his boots thudding against the wet stone. In the Lord's solar, comfort looks a little different. Basins of warmed water are prepared with scented herbs, perhaps a luxury imported from the Levant. The lady of the house washes her hands and her face, then dabs rose oil on her temples. A superstition persists that fragrant oils could ward off illness by strengthening the spirit. Whether that was just belief or a placebo, no one can really say. It does, however, make the chamber smell far kinder than the kitchens down below. Even the simple act of brushing your teeth, if you could call it that, involved salt, charcoal, or a chew stick that was cut from hazel. People would spit into the rushes on the floor and then wipe their mouths with bits of cloth. No mint, no foam, no ceremony, just a quick scrape and a prayer. You wince slightly, just imagining the texture of ashes against your enamel. A fragile sort of order emerges from all this inconvenience. The servants maintain their routines not because they believe in cleanliness the way we do, but because habit is survival. When water is scarce, they scrub only what shows. They perfume what can't be washed. They sweep rushes that are laced with mint and chamomile to trick the nose into believing the air is fresh. These small illusions are what keep morale alive. Experts who study domestic life point out that winter hygiene had more to do with smoke than with soap. The constant fires dried out the skin, sterilized the air in their own harsh way, and painted every face with the faint scent of tallow and ash. You might laugh at the idea of feeling clean through smoke, but to them, it meant safety. Fire drove away not just the cold, but unseen sickness as well. As the afternoon deepens, the castle grows humid near the kitchens and bone dry near the towers. Each corner has its own unique smell. Vinegar and herbs, lye and wool, sweat and smoke. You find the mixture strangely comforting now, like proof of life. The servants who pass you just nod politely, their faces chapped, their spirits practical. In the courtyard, buckets are lined up near a well that's crusted with ice. Someone is chipping away at it with an iron bar, sending shards flying. A child laughs, chasing a piece that glitters like glass. For a moment, the whole castle seems lighter, warmer, not because the temperature has changed, but because people just keep moving. Motion is the only real luxury in this kind of weather. When evening comes, the hall will fill up again with smoke and chatter. Someone will complain about the smell of the privy. Another will joke that it's warmer than their own bed. Laughter will ripple through the gloom. And as the candles burn low, the truth will settle like dust. Winter is not conquered here, it's only managed, one bucket and one breath at a time. The sound of footsteps wakes you before dawn. It's a steady rhythm against the flagstones, one that echoes right through the keep. The air feels heavy, not just with the cold, but with the quiet purpose of people who have work to do long before the lords even begin to stir. You follow the faint glow of a lantern that's bobbing down the corridor and step into the world of the servants, the unseen pulse that keeps this whole castle alive. A bell rings somewhere down below. It's not loud, but it's clear enough to stir everyone from their straw mattresses. It's the signal to light the fires. The air in these lower halls bites at your cheeks, dry and sharp. A line of servants moves through the half-darkness, each one carrying a bundle of kindling or a clay pot of coals that's been kept glowing overnight in the kitchen hearth. The smell of smoke and wool fills the passage. From household accounts that were written centuries ago, we know that the very first duty of the day was to rekindle life into the sleeping fires. Every single hearth had to be coaxed awake. Every brazier had to be fed before the frost could creep in any further. The youngest and lowest ranking servants were given this task because it required no rank, only endurance and thick fingers. You can hear them murmuring small prayers as they blow gently on the embers until sparks catch and flames begin to bloom in a dull orange light. One of the maids, her nose red with the cold, wipes her hands on her apron and moves on to the next chamber. She works in silence, her shadow large and soft against the wall. This ritual just repeats itself all throughout the castle, a slow awakening of light and warmth. In these early hours, no one speaks very much. The air itself feels almost sacred. There was a curious practice that persisted in many of the great houses. The steward would walk the corridors just after sunrise, touching each door to judge the temperature inside. His notes would determine who was managing their firewood ration wisely. A lord could either scold or reward someone depending on how warm his guests or his family had kept their rooms. The steward's job was part administrator, part judge of these invisible economies of heat. In the kitchens down below, the day has already begun. A cook strikes a piece of iron against flint, her movements brisk and certain. The sparks leap like tiny fireworks before they land in some straw. Soon the air thickens with warmth and the first scent of porridge. Her assistant is chopping onions with numb fingers, his breath puffing across the cutting board. Even before the sun has climbed, breakfast is waiting to be born. The rhythm of the work follows the castle's hierarchy. Servants of a lower rank clean and haul. Those who are slightly higher up oversee and report. In one corner, a scullion is scrubbing yesterday's dishes with sand, his sleeves soaked all the way to the elbow. The sound of his work mixes with the shuffle of feet, the occasional cough, and the soft hum of voices that are just starting to thaw out. Scholars who study medieval domestic life still argue about how much rest these servants ever truly got. Some suggest that they worked from before dawn until long after the lords went to bed, just stealing sleep in little snatches. Others believe that winter brought a slower tempo when the dark itself forced even the busiest hands to pause. Either way, the work never truly ended. You follow a boy named Edwin as he carries a torch through the narrow servants' passage. His task this morning is to fetch water from the well. The rope bites into his palms, the bucket heavy with half-frozen slush. He's whistling softly to himself, a tune his mother taught him before she sent him to the castle to earn his keep. The sound echoes oddly, both bright and lonely. He passes through a small door that leads to the outer yard. The snow crunches beneath his boots. The stars are still visible, bright and cold up above the towers. All around him the castle is sleeping, but it never truly rests. Smoke is curling from a few of the chimneys where the fires have taken hold. The stables are stirring with the snorts of horses and the shuffle of hay. Somewhere a dog shakes, sending frost flying from its coat. Inside again, Edwin pours the water into wooden tubs near the kitchen. The cook just nods without even looking up. He will repeat this journey several times before the first meal is served. His arms are already aching, but he hides the pain. There is a pride here, quiet but steady, in keeping others warm and fed. In another part of the keep, older servants are sweeping the great hall. They gather up last night's ashes, replace the rushes on the floor, and check for any embers that might start a fire in the wrong place. The scent of herbs in the new rushes rises faintly, sweet against the lingering smell of smoke. It's strange how this mixture of labor and scent begins to feel like a kind of prayer. A small but revealing habit catches your attention. Before lighting any new fire, some of the servants touch the hearthstone 3 times, whispering a blessing that combines Christian and older pagan elements. They speak of Saint Bridget, the protector of home and flame. The gesture is quick, almost hidden, but it lingers in the rhythm of hands that know the cold all too well. By mid-morning, the castle is breathing fully again. Fires are crackling in every room. Steam is rising from the kitchens, and even the great hall is beginning to smell of warmth. The servants are moving like streams through the corridors, each one with a task that fits perfectly into the day's choreography. A few of them laugh as they pass each other, a brief exchange of cheer that disappears as quickly as it came. From somewhere above, you hear the bell that signals the lords are stirring. The servants straighten their backs, wipe the soot from their faces, and prepare for another round of invisibility. Soon all their work will be hidden behind tapestries and the illusion of effortless comfort. Yet without them, the castle would fall silent and cold within just a few hours. You step back into the main corridor, where the air now feels almost gentle. Light is spilling through the narrow windows, painting the stone in gold. The scent of bread and wood smoke trails behind you. For a brief moment, you sense what the servants must feel. A small victory every time a fire catches, every time warmth pushes back the dark. It isn't glory, but it's enough. As the morning brightens, you climb the narrow staircase that winds its way upward toward the private chambers of the castle's lady. The air grows a little warmer with each step you take, faintly scented with beeswax and lavender. Up here, above the echo of the servants and the smell of smoke, life takes on a much slower rhythm. This is the solar, the sunlit heart of domestic comfort, where the lady spends her winter days surrounded by a warmth that is carefully tended and never, ever wasted. The door creaks as you step inside. The space is modest, but it's elegant. Its walls are draped in embroidered hangings that soften both the chill and the sound. A brazier is glowing in the center of the room, perfuming the air with resin and pine. The floor is covered with thick rush mats that have been woven with dried herbs. A small window, shuttered against the cold, allows only a gentle shaft of light to fall across a table that's scattered with embroidery threads. You can hear the quiet hum of women's voices. Two maids are spinning flax on small wheels, their feet moving in a steady rhythm. The lady is sitting by the brazier, her hands busy with a piece of tapestry that depicts a hunting scene, the hounds frozen mid-leap in golden thread. Her needle flashes like a sliver of light, and for a moment you completely forget the winter that's raging beyond the walls. From letters and household accounts of the time, we know that noble women spent long hours in rooms just like this one, managing their estates through scribes, mending linens and supervising the servants. The solar was more than just a retreat. It was an office, a workshop, and a sanctuary from the public life of the Great Hall. The lady's authority radiated quietly from this small, sun-warmed space. A curious detail that was recorded by travelers tells of how these chambers sometimes doubled as informal schools. Young girls of noble birth learned not only embroidery and music, but also arithmetic, reading, and the art of polite conversation. The lady of the house acted as both their teacher and their example. You can almost see her pausing in her work to correct a pupil's stitches, or to recite a psalm while the brazier crackles softly beside her. At one corner of the room sits a small harp. Its strings are humming faintly in the draught that slips through the shutter. The lady's daughter is plucking a few tentative notes, smiling shyly when the sound falters. The melody is simple but sweet, and it carries the warmth of habit and hope. It fills the chamber with a kind of fragile courage. Historians still continue to discuss whether the term solar referred purely to sunlight or to solitude. Some argue it meant the room that was most exposed to the southern sun, while others suggest it described the place where the family withdrew from the bustle down below. Whatever the origin, the name just feels right. The space glows with a quiet intimacy that belongs to daylight, even in the darkest months. A maid enters, carrying a small jug of heated wine that's been spiced with cinnamon and cloves. The scent cuts right through the chill, rich and soothing. The lady accepts it with a graceful nod, offering a sip to one of the younger girls. They giggle softly at the warmth that blooms on their tongues. It is a luxury that few in the castle can afford. On a nearby shelf rests a psalter, its pages painted with delicate gold initials. The lady traces a finger along a line of Latin text, murmuring a prayer, before she returns to her embroidery. Faith here is woven right into the routine, not separate from it. The rhythm of her needle and thread mirrors the rhythm of devotion. At her feet, a small dog is curled up on a cushion, half asleep. Its fur gleams in the light, and it occasionally lifts its head to watch the maids with a mild curiosity. Animals were common companions in solars, both for affection and for warmth. A favourite lapdog could be as precious as any jewel. The conversation turns to news from the village. A servant brings word that the river has frozen over completely, making it easier to cross but much harder to draw water from. The lady listens thoughtfully, then dictates a message to her steward, instructing that extra firewood be sent to the smithy. Her voice is calm, deliberate, and kind. It's easy to forget that her decisions are what keep the castle functioning, her management the invisible thread that holds all this comfort together. A curious household ritual unfolds as the day deepens. The ladies' maids hang damp cloths near the brazier, believing that a soft moisture in the air keeps the skin from cracking. They also rub their hands with goose fat that's been mixed with rose water, a homemade balm against frostbite. It leaves a faint sheen on their skin and a scent that lingers in the room. You find it oddly pleasant, like a memory that's been trapped in perfume. By mid-afternoon, the light is fading again. The embroidery is folded away. The instrument is set aside. The lady walks to the shuttered window and opens it just slightly. A gust of icy air rushes in, carrying the faint cry of crows and the smell of snow. She watches for a moment, her breath visible in the chill. Then she closes it gently. You can sense a longing there, not just for warmth, but for the open world that she rarely gets to enter in the winter. Experts in medieval daily life suggest that the solar also served as a refuge from the emotional cold of courtly formality. In here, laughter was softer, stories were shared without caution, and a woman could speak her thoughts without the echo of male judgment. The privacy must have felt like sunlight itself. As the candles are lit, their glow settles across the tapestries, bringing to life the scenes of nights and forests that were stitched months earlier. The room becomes golden again, the kind of light that invites drowsiness. You listen to the whisper of the spinning wheels, the gentle murmur of prayers, and the faint pop of pine resin in the brazier. Outside, the wind is rising, brushing against the tower walls like a slow drumbeat. But in here, in this small haven above the world, warmth feels human, crafted by hands and voices and faith. You realize that survival in winter wasn't only about fire and food, it was also about moments just like this, the delicate art of turning routine into peace. The wind sharpens as evening approaches. You make your way down the spiral staircase from the solar, following the echo of heavy boots striking against the stone. The rhythm grows louder until it fills the entire courtyard like a drumbeat. The knights are training again. Despite the cold, their movements are steady, rooted in stubbornness. Snowflakes are swirling in the air, caught in the flicker of torches that are struggling to stay lit. The courtyard smells of iron and sweat, two scents that never quite seem to leave a castle. A dozen men-at-arms are circling the practice yard, their breath hissing through clenched teeth. Their armor catches the dull winter light, each plate rimmed with frost. When they strike, the clang of metal rings across the walls like church bells that are out of tune. You flinch at the sound, sharp and bright against the muffled snow. From the writings of chroniclers who travelled with noble households, we know that winter training was considered both a punishment and a necessity. A knight could not afford to go soft. Even when the rivers froze and the roads vanished under drifts of snow, a sword still needed to feel like an extension of the body, not some foreign weight. To stop was to lose your edge, and your honour along with it. A young squire is struggling to lift a practice sword that's as long as his arm. His breath is coming in clouds, his cheeks red with the effort. The master-at-arms is watching him without any mercy, his cloak snapping behind him. "Again," he says. The boy obeys, his feet slipping in the snow. Each motion is awkward but determined. driven by the dream of one day earning the right to carry steel that gleams for real. Oddly enough, a few records mention that some lords encouraged their men to practice indoors during harsh storms, turning empty halls into makeshift arenas. Furniture was dragged aside, tapestries were rolled up, and straw was scattered on the floor to soften any falls. Just imagine the thunder of boots and the echo of grunts filling a room that was meant for feasts and dancing. Discipline did not simply rest just because the weather did. A blacksmith crosses the yard, his apron stiff from the cold, carrying a set of repaired gauntlets. He pauses to watch the training, smiling faintly. His forge is glowing behind him, a pocket of molten colour in the grey world. The air around it just hums with heat, smelling of charcoal and hot metal. The contrast between the fire and the frost seems almost alive. Experts on medieval warfare still disagree about how often real combat actually happened in the winter. Some claim that campaigns would pause until the spring. Others insist that surprise attacks in the cold months were a favoured strategy. Yet even in times of peace, the training continued. Knights were expected to embody vigilance, to keep the body ready for violence at any hour. You step a little closer to the fence that surrounds the practice ground. A knight raises his visor, revealing a face that's red and glistening, his breath short but steady. He wipes his brow with a woolen sleeve and laughs. "Better to sweat in the snow than bleed in the summer," he says. His companion grins, nodding in agreement. The camaraderie feels genuine, a kind of warmth that even the winter can't seem to touch. Nearby, a farrier is tending to a restless horse. The animal stamps its feet, steam rising from its flank, its breath clouding the air as the farrier murmurs in low tones, hammering a new shoe into place. Sparks leap briefly into the gloom before they vanish. The smell of a scorched hoof mixes with the snow and the smoke, a scent that is oddly comforting in its familiarity. You notice the way the knights move, their armour creaking softly underneath. They're wearing padded garments that trap heat but also sweat. When the training finally ends, they peel off their layers, steam rising from their bodies like mist from a thawing river. A page hurries forward with a cloth and a cup of ale, his hands trembling from the cold. The knight takes both with a nod of thanks. One of the older men is sitting on a bench near the wall, his hair silver under his hood. His armour is dented, his gloves patched. He watches the younger fighters with the distant calm of someone who has seen far too many battles. He tells you almost to himself that in winter, a soldier's greatest enemy isn't another sword, but stillness. "Keep moving," he says softly, "and the cold will never claim you." There's a curious superstition among these men. Before every single training session, they trace a small cross on their blade with a gloved finger. It's less about piety and more about rhythm, a ritual to steady both the hand and the heart. One knight even carries a charm in the shape of a tiny sun tucked away inside his gauntlet. He swears it keeps his fingers from freezing. The sound of the master's whistle cuts through the air. Practice is over. The men gather their weapons, joking as they trudge back toward the barracks. Their laughter bounces off the courtyard walls, softening the austerity of the stone. One of them slips on a patch of ice, curses, and then grins at the teasing that follows. These moments of levity are precious. They keep the cold from seeping into the spirit. As the knights disappear inside, you linger for a moment near the forge. The blacksmith wipes his hands on a rag and nods at you. His voice carries a quiet pride. "We all earn our heat differently," he says. "Some by swinging blades, some by hammering iron." He returns to his work, the sparks flying like brief stars against the dusk. The snow begins to fall again, thick and silent. The courtyard grows dim, except for the orange glow of the forge. The training field stands empty now, the footprints already fading beneath the fresh flakes. The silence feels deep, almost sacred. You understand now that this daily ritual of effort and endurance was as much spiritual as it was physical. It was how the people in these walls kept their courage from freezing solid. You turn back toward the keep, the sound of your own footsteps the only noise left. Behind you, the forge is still glowing faintly, a reminder that strength in winter isn't just about muscle or metal, it's about persistence, the quiet fire that refuses to go out, even when the whole world turns white. Night falls quickly, swallowing the last grey streaks of daylight behind the hills. The air in the courtyard stiffens with the cold, and smoke drifts upward in slow ribbons from the chimneys. You move toward the chapel, its narrow windows flickering with candlelight. Inside, the world feels hushed and close, a soft refuge from the wind. The scent of incense greets you first, warm, resinous, and faintly sweet. The stone walls seem to absorb every sound, muting the outside world. In here, even your footsteps feel sacred. A few figures are kneeling on wooden benches, their cloaks pulled tight around their shoulders. Clouds of breath rise in front of their bowed heads like offerings. The priest is standing near the altar, his hands clasped, his voice low, as he chants the evening prayers. The words ripple softly through the air, blending with the crackle of the wax. From the surviving records of medieval estates, we know that life in a castle followed the rhythm of the church bell. Faith wasn't simply a matter of belief, it was the architecture of time itself. Dawn began with matins, and dusk ended with compline. Between those hours, every act, cooking, training, mending, fit into a framework of devotion. In winter, when daylight was scarce, prayer became both a clock and a comfort. A curious practice emerges in the gloom. At the back of the chapel, servants are lighting small votive candles, one for each family member who is away from the castle. The wax burns unevenly, sometimes sputtering, sometimes steady. People would watch these flames the way we watch the weather, believing that how a candle burned could foretell the welfare of its subject. You see one flicker brightly, and an older woman smiles in quiet relief. The chill is seeping up through the flagstones, numbing your feet. The priest's voice deepens, carrying words in Latin that few of his listeners truly understand. But the meaning here isn't in comprehension. It lies in the sound, the repetition, and the light. The glow of the candles transforms every surface into gold, even the simplest wooden cross. The cold is still there, but it feels held at bay, tamed by faith and by routine. Some historians have wondered whether belief intensified during harsh winters because there was nothing else to cling to. Others think the opposite, that the ritual softened fear into habit, giving people something steady to repeat while the world froze outside. Whatever the truth, religion in these months was as essential as firewood. It gave a shape to endurance. You notice the chapel's ceiling, dark with smoke. The paint has faded, but you can see faint angels hovering in the arches, their faces soft and almost human. Wax is dripping from the iron sconces like frozen rain. The altar cloth, embroidered with stars, catches what little light there is. Someone coughs in the back, a quick, apologetic sound. The congregation doesn't stir. A bell rings, small and pure. The priest raises a chalice and the candles seem to lean toward it. You feel a strange warmth then, not from the heat, but from the stillness. The moment feels suspended, as though time itself has stopped to listen. For people who lived surrounded by stone and frost, this must have been what hope sounded like. Oddly enough, certain castles had chapels that were built directly above the kitchen, so that the rising warmth from the fires below would heat the sacred space. The combination of prayer and stew created an unexpected mingling of aromas, incense and meat broth sharing the same air. It's said that some priests complained, while others considered it a divine mercy. The prayers end. People cross themselves, rise slowly, and file out through the narrow doorway. You follow, feeling the sudden rush of cold hit your face like a memory. Outside, the snow has begun again, soft and steady. The courtyard is glowing faintly in the starlight, the footsteps already fading under the powder. A small group lingers near the chapel door. They're talking quietly about the sermon, about tomorrow's chores, about how the candles burned tonight. One woman swears she saw a halo of light around her husband's flame. The others smile, but they don't argue. In winter, belief is as fragile and as necessary as breath. You make your way along the wall toward the inner keep. Somewhere above, a bell tolls once for the evening meal. The sound rolls over the courtyard like a wave, deep and slow. Every creature in the castle seems to pause for a heartbeat. The horses, the dogs, even the wind. Then life resumes, footsteps hurrying toward warmth and food. Inside the hall, the hearth is roaring again. The smell of smoke clings to everything, your hair, your wool, your skin. A minstrel is tuning his lute near the dais, his fingers blue but quick. His melody drifts upward, echoing faintly through the rafters. The tune carries a touch of the chapel's calm, though it softens into something homely, something human. In the corner, a servant is lighting more candles, replacing the ones that guttered out during the prayers. Each new flame seems to steal a fraction of the darkness from the room. You notice how people instinctively move closer together, their conversations quiet but warm. It's not just the fire that keeps them alive, but proximity itself. Faith, food, laughter, and light. They all weave together like threads in a single fabric. Without one, the others would unravel. Tonight, that fabric is holding strong. The air is humming gently with contentment, and even the oldest servant is smiling as she ladles out soup. You sit for a while, your hands cupped around a bowl that is steaming in the candlelight. Beyond the thick walls, winter is raging on, indifferent and endless. Yet here, inside this flickering fortress of belief and breath, people have found a way to make warmth out of words and ritual. You sip slowly, tasting both salt and comfort. For now, the cold can wait at the door. The next morning arrives slow and grey, the kind of day that never fully brightens. You can hear laughter before you even reach the great hall. It's light, scattered, rising and falling like the chirping of sparrows. When you step inside, you find the source, the children of the castle, all bundled up in wool, their cheeks pink with cold and joy. A small fire is burning at the far end of the room, tended by a watchful nurse. Around her, half a dozen children are chasing each other between the benches and tapestries, their giggles echoing through the rafters. You notice the eldest, a boy of perhaps 12, dressed in a short tunic with a wooden sword at his belt. His stride is purposeful, his eyes sharp. This must be the Lord's heir, already rehearsing the authority that will one day be his. From letters and chronicles, we know that children in medieval castles grew up in a curious balance of privilege and discipline. The noble sons were trained early to be knights or administrators, the daughters to be wives or stewards of households. Yet winter softened these roles. For a few months, the cold slowed duty down into play. The lessons continued, but so did the laughter. The tutor is sitting near the hearth, his ink frozen inside a horn pot. He sighs, rubbing his hands together before unrolling a parchment. The children groan as he calls them closer. Their breath fogs in the air as they recite Latin verses, stumbling over consonants that feel too big for their tongues. The youngest, forgets his line, then giggles until everyone joins in. Even the tutor can't help but smile. A curious practice that was recorded in several households involved teaching through song during the darkest months. The melody kept the children's attention and distracted them from the cold. You can just imagine the hall filled with voices, chanting lessons about virtue and saints, while the snow drifted past the narrow windows. The music must have sounded like sunlight trying to break through. When the lesson ends, the nurse ushers the children out toward the courtyard. "A little air," she says, wrapping scarves around their faces. You follow as they tumble out into the white world outside, their boots crunching through the frost. The older boys grab wooden shields and mock each other with theatrical battle cries. The younger ones chase after a leather ball, shouting gleefully when it lands in a snowdrift. Scholars who study medieval childhood still debate how much freedom noble children really had. Some accounts paint a strict world of obedience and ceremony. Others reveal moments of genuine affection and indulgence. The truth perhaps lies somewhere in between. Watching these children now, you can sense both the hierarchy of their bows and titles woven through a web of laughter and play. The girls, wrapped in fur-lined cloaks, are building small figures out of snow near the stables. One shapes hers into the form of a bird, another into a tiny castle, complete with towers made of twigs. A maid praises their work and hands out warm cider in wooden cups. The steam curls upward, caught briefly in the pale sunlight before it vanishes. A boy named Thomas challenges another to climb the outer stairs to the battlements. The nurse scolds him, but her voice is lost in the wind. They clamber up anyway, their laughter echoing down the walls. From up above they wave to you, proud conquerors of their frozen kingdom. For a moment, they look utterly free, untouched by the weight of title or expectation. Inside again, their gloves are dripping from the melting snow. The tutor frowns at the puddles that are forming on the rushes, but no one pays him much mind. The younger ones settle down near the fire with their wooden toys, horses, knights, and tiny castles carved by the carpenter during the long evenings. These playthings are rough, but beloved, their edges smoothed by generations of small hands. Oddly enough, in some noble households, pets were assigned to the children as lessons in care and responsibility. A pup is curled up near the youngest girl now, his tail wagging lazily. She feeds him a crumb from her sleeve and whispers something that only he can hear. The two of them seem completely content in their own private little world. A servant enters with a tray of oatcakes. The smell of honey and butter fills the hall, pulling every gaze toward it. The children swarm around, their manners forgotten for a heartbeat. The nurse laughs, pretending to scold them, then hands out the treats one by one. Warm food is pure joy in this season, even for those who were born to plenty. By midday, the lessons resume in a smaller chamber. The tutor unrolls a map, its edges cracked with age. He points to faraway lands, France, the Holy Roman Empire, places the children know only through stories. They listen with wide eyes as he speaks of snow-covered passes and strange tongues. You notice how they all lean a little closer, drawn to the idea that the world might be bigger than the walls around them. Experts agree that winter education often doubled as storytelling. With very little light and even fewer distractions, knowledge was passed down through tales. Geography became an adventure, morality became a parable, and history turned into a legend. The line between learning and dreaming just blurred until they were both the same. Later, as the light begins to fade, the nurse gathers the children once more. She tells them a story of Saint Nicholas rescuing sailors from a storm. Her voice is low and soothing, each word measured like a lullaby. The children lean against each other, their eyes half closed, their faces golden in the firelight. One by one, they start to drift towards sleep. The eldest boy resists, insisting that he's too old for stories. Yet when the nurse finishes, even he smiles faintly before he follows the others off to bed. The tutor watches them go, then sits by the dying fire. His breath forms a soft cloud in the air. You linger for a moment in the quiet that follows, listening to the faint crackle of the embers and the distant sigh of the wind through the towers. Childhood in a medieval castle was not simple, but it was real. It was built from duty, from imagination, and from the small mercies of warmth and play. You feel an unexpected tenderness for these children who laughed their way through the frost and learned by candlelight, growing up in a world that was both harsh and strangely kind. The air in the castle shifts again as the winter deepens. The fires burn longer, the meals grow heavier, and the smell of smoke clings to every single thread of clothing. Somewhere behind the kitchen, in a small chamber that's lined with shelves of jars and bundles of dried herbs, another rhythm is unfolding, the quiet work of the castle's healer. You step inside and feel the temperature drop just slightly. The air smells of mint, vinegar, and something earthy that you can't quite name. A woman is standing at the table, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows, her fingers stained green. She's crushing dried leaves in a wooden mortar, humming under her breath. Her voice is low and steady, a tune that seems to keep time with the pestle's rhythm. The light from the narrow window is painting the dust motes gold as they drift across the room. On a shelf beside her rests a small iron brazier where a thin thread of smoke is curling from some burning rosemary. We know from surviving manuscripts like the Leech Book of Bald that medieval healers combined what we would now call medicine, herbalism, and prayer. They believed that illness came from an imbalance of the humours, of the seasons, of the spirit. Winter, with its cold and its stillness, was thought to invite melancholy and phlegm. Everything they mixed sought to warm and rouse the body back to life. The healer looks up, smiles faintly, and gestures for you to come a little closer. She opens a jar that's filled with dark honey and crumbled herbs. For sore throats, she says softly, stirring the mixture with a spoon that's been carved from bone. The honey gleams thick and amber in the light. If the cough is stubborn, I add garlic. Saints forgive the smell. You laugh quietly, and she nods as if to say that laughter itself is a medicine too. A curious detail that was recorded by travellers mentions that in winter, castles often smelled like a blend of kitchens and apothecaries. The same herbs that flavoured the food also filled poultices, teas and salves. Sage for both digestion and infection, thyme for courage and for coughs, marjoram for grief. The healer's shelves are a library of these dual-purpose miracles, each one labelled in faded ink. A boy enters, sniffling and red-eyed. He's carrying a message from the stables. One of the grooms has fallen ill. The healer gathers a basket, placing inside it small packets of dried elderflower, a flask of vinegar, and a charm that's been wrapped in linen. You notice her fingers trace a small sign over the charm before she tucks it in. Her voice lowers to a whisper. For comfort, she explains. Sometimes the heart needs more tending than the body. Historians still discuss how much of this work was practical and how much of it was faith. Some argue that early medicine relied more on belief than on evidence. Others insist that these healers, who were often women, preserved knowledge that modern science would later rediscover. Whatever the truth, their craft was half observation, half intuition, and entirely necessary. You follow her to the stables where the sick groom is lying on a pile of blankets. His face is flushed, his breath shallow. The healer kneels beside him, mixes vinegar with some crushed herbs, and presses the cloth gently to his forehead. The smell is sharp, but soothing. She murmurs words that are too quiet to catch, part prayer, part comfort. The groom opens his eyes briefly, manages a faint smile, and then closes them again. Back in her chamber, the healer pours a dark liquid from a flask into a cup. It smells of wine and cloves. She explains that it's Hippocras, a spiced wine that was believed to warm the blood and strengthen the heart. It's both a tonic and an indulgence. She offers you a sip, and the warmth spreads through you immediately. The taste is rich, sweet, and slightly bitter. Oddly enough, there was a belief that winter illnesses came from the stars. Certain constellations were thought to influence the body's humours. The healer keeps a small chart rolled up by her window where she marks the phases of the moon. "It helps me know when to cut, when to rest," she says, glancing toward it. Whether the stars truly guided her or simply gave her courage, no one can say. On another table, small bowls hold powders of ground chalk and crushed petals. She uses them to make salves for frostbite. She explains that the snow burns the skin just as much as fire does, and so she treats it with oil and with patience. Nearby, a bundle of dried ivy is hanging upside down. For rheumatism, she adds, hung near the bed to draw the pain away. Experts in medieval healthcare note how physical and spiritual remedies just blurred together. Healing was as much about restoring balance to the soul as it was to the body. A confession, a prayer, or a candle could accompany a dose of medicine. The healer herself confides quietly that she sometimes pretends to be confident even when she's uncertain. People heal faster, she says, when they believe they can. Outside, the snow is thickening again, coating the world in silence. The healer steps to the doorway and looks out. "Cold keeps everything honest," she says softly. "You can't lie to the body in winter. It tells you what it needs." She closes the door gently, returns to her table, and begins to grind another set of herbs. A small cat leaps onto the bench, its paws silent. It watches her work, its tail curling like a question mark. She scratches its head absently. The animal purrs and the room feels warmer for it. The healer glances at you, her eyes crinkling with amusement. "Even the cat earns its keep," she says. "The mice fear her more than they fear the cold." The brazier's flame flickers, and shadows dance across the jars. You realize that this small chamber, hidden away from the grand halls, is another kind of sanctuary. Here, the world narrows down to touch, scent, and faith. You smell the rosemary and the honey. You hear the steady scrape of the pestle on the stone. And you understand that this too was survival, the gentle art of easing pain when everything outside turns to ice. The next morning, the castle is wrapped in silence. The snow lies deep against the walls, soft as wool, muting every sound except for the faint creak of wood and the low moan of the wind through the arrow slits. You pull your cloak a little tighter and follow the echo of boots through the courtyard. Today, movement means communication, and communication means life. The messenger's horse is waiting by the gate, its breath steaming into the cold air. The animal stamps its feet impatiently while a groom tightens its girth strap. Nearby, a man in a thick cloak is checking a leather satchel that's hanging from his shoulder. Inside are several folded letters that have been sealed with wax, each one marked with the Lord's crest. His gloved fingers touch them with the care of someone who is handling treasure. Records from royal and noble households reveal that winter messengers were a class apart. They needed to be able to ride through conditions that would make most travelers turn back. The roads were buried, the bridges were treacherous, and the rivers were either frozen or flooding, depending on the week. Yet the life of the castle depended on their journeys. Grain shipments, taxes, alliances, and warnings. They all rode inside those letters. The porter opens the small postern gate, and a gust of snow rushes in. The messenger pulls his hood low and mounts his horse quickly. His cloak snaps behind him like a flag before he disappears into the white distance. The steward presses a small flask into his hand. "For warmth," he says. The man just nods once and spurs his horse forward, vanishing almost at once. The hoofbeats fade, swallowed up by the snow. A curious detail that was preserved in medieval correspondence mentions that letters were sometimes wrapped in oilcloth and tucked inside hollowed-out reeds or horn tubes to keep them dry. You can just picture the messenger riding, with such precious cargo held close against his chest, trusting in layers of wool and stubbornness to protect it. The wind would tear at his hood, the snow would sting his eyes, but the message would go on. Inside the castle, the scribes are continuing their own work. You find them in a narrow chamber just off the hall, seated at a long table that's littered with quills and half-used candles. Their fingers are smudged with ink, their breath visible in the cold air. One of them is scratching words across a piece of parchment with slow precision, pausing often to warm his hands over a brazier. The faint scraping of the pen on the skin feels like the heartbeat of the building. We know from surviving missives that communication between castles and courts followed very strict forms of politeness, even in emergencies. The language was careful, formal, and steeped in ritual. Every letter began with blessings and ended with prayers for health and a safe return. Between those courtesies, matters of trade, war, and marriage were all negotiated in sentences as sharp as swords. A young cleric dips his pen again and leans close to the parchment. He's writing by dictation, repeating each phrase softly as he goes. The lord is pacing behind him, dictating a message to a neighboring baron. His tone is measured, his eyes thoughtful. These words aren't just ink. They are the castle's breath, reaching out beyond its walls. Oddly enough, pigeons were sometimes kept as secondary messengers during long sieges or deep winters. They roosted in the upper towers, fed carefully on barley and peas. A small boy is now climbing the steps with a pouch of grain. He whispers to the birds as he scatters it, their wings fluttering softly. In a world that's frozen solid, the faint rush of their feathers feels like a promise that movement still exists. Down in the gatehouse, another kind of communication is happening. Two guards are exchanging news from the village, whose crops survived the frost, who has fallen ill, who found a wolf track near the woods. Information travels here not by parchment but by voice, passed like embers from one mouth to another. A cough, a sigh, a whispered story of strange lights in the forest. They are all pieces of the winter's gossip. Experts who study medieval logistics are still divided about how far messages could reliably travel during the coldest months. Some evidence suggests that a good courier could cover 30 miles a day, even in the snow. Others claim that entire regions would become isolated until the spring. The truth may be that success depended less on the roads than on resolve. The messenger from earlier will stop at way stations along the route, small manors or monasteries where a warm meal and a fire await him. In return, he'll carry letters for others, becoming part of a web that keeps the realm breathing. One monk wrote that riders like him were the veins through which the kingdom's lifeblood runs. You can just imagine him nodding in satisfaction, quill in hand, as the fire smoked beside him. Back in the scribe's chamber, the last letter of the day is sealed with red wax. The steward presses the signet ring into it and holds it up to the candlelight. The wax shines briefly and then it hardens. The smell of it, faintly sweet, faintly burnt, lingers in the air. This small ritual repeats itself day after day, the written voice of the castle carrying across mountains and rivers. A boy collects the finished letters, wraps them in linen, and sets them in a wooden box. He locks it, pockets the key, and hurries away to deliver it to the stable master. The rhythm of these actions feels ceremonial, each step performed with a solemn efficiency. In a world that can turn silent overnight under the snow, communication becomes an act of defiance, proof that people are still reaching out toward each other. You step outside again. The wind cuts at your face, but the sky has cleared a little. Far off in the distance, you can imagine the messenger still riding, his cloak white with frost. The land stretches out endless before him, a sheet of frozen silver under the pale sun. Somewhere beyond that horizon waits another castle, another fire, another pair of hands to break the wax seal and read his lord's words aloud. As you turn back toward the keep, a bell rings faintly from the chapel tower. The sound carries across the snow like a thread, binding this isolated world together. You realize that even in the coldest winters, voices found ways to travel, by horse, by bird, by parchment, by prayer. Words, just like warmth, refuse to be still. The sky is hanging low and pale, heavy with another promise of snow. The air tastes like iron and quiet. Down in the armory, the men-at-arms are oiling their weapons and muttering about the weather. The forge is still glowing, the hammer still ringing, but war feels very far away. Even so, no one is truly relaxing. In every castle, winter brings a strange question. Does the cold end the fighting, or does it merely pause it? You walk among the racks of spears and shields, feeling the faint heat from the forge on your face. A young soldier is sharpening a blade with slow care, his breath a steady rhythm. The grindstone sings as the steel kisses the stone. Sparks leap and then vanish. He smiles at you, looking tired but alert. "We keep ready," he says. "Snow or no snow, someone always finds a reason to fight." Chronicles from across Europe paint a mixed picture of winter warfare. Some armies would pack up entirely once the frost settled in, fearing hunger more than the enemy. Others would take advantage of the frozen rivers to cross terrain that would be impossible in the summer. Battles became rarer, but raids did not. Hunger and ambition both seemed to ignore the season. A curious note appears in the writings of a monk from Burgundy. He described a siege where the attackers used frozen animal hides as shields, claiming the slick surface would turn aside arrows. It may have been an exaggeration, but it shows the ingenuity that's born of desperation. You can just imagine the men crouched behind those glistening hides, their breath freezing in their beards as they crept toward the walls. In the great hall, the Lord is sitting with his advisors, tracing lines on a rough map. His fingers move over the inked rivers and mountain ridges. The steward is pointing out supply routes. The captain is noting the danger of avalanches. Their voices are low but firm. War is never far from their thoughts, even while the hearth is burning and laughter is filling the corridor just outside. Historians still disagree about whether the cold truly stopped medieval armies. Some evidence suggests that truces were common, negotiated to spare both the men and the horses. Others argue that ambition burned hotter than any frost, driving campaigns even through the ice and sleet. Perhaps both are true, just depending on who was in command and what their pride demanded. In the courtyard, two soldiers are practicing with wooden staves, their boots slipping on the packed snow. The blows sound heavy, hollow and awkward. Each strike is followed by laughter and a quick curse. They're practicing not for glory, but just to keep their blood moving. Motion, again, is survival. Nearby, an older man is polishing a set of chainmail, every single ring darkened with soot. He's humming softly to himself, a tune that might be a prayer or simply a habit. His fingers are moving with the ease of years. When you ask how long he has served, he just shrugs. "Since the winter my beard was black," he says. The wars change, but the cold stays the same. A strange superstition drifts among the men. They say that the ghost of a soldier who froze during a battle walks the fields near the castle on nights when the wind blows from the east. If you hear him, you must not look back, or you will lose your courage. No one admits to believing it, yet every guard glances over his shoulder when the wind howls. You climb up to the battlements, where the guards are standing watch. The landscape below is still and pale, dotted with the faint plumes of smoke from distant cottages. The horizon just disappears into the haze. From up here, the peace looks absolute. Yet everyone knows how quickly that illusion can shatter. A single torch on the ridge, a rider appearing too far to the north, and the alarm bell would sound. Experts in medieval logistics remind us that castles weren't just fortresses, they were also supply hubs. During the winter, the stores of grain, salted meat, and arrows were counted daily. The garrison's survival depended on discipline. Every single crumb mattered, every candle stub, every drop of oil. A careless steward could lose a fortress faster than an enemy's catapult. In the distance, you can hear the faint crack of ice on the moat. A duck startles, flapping up into the grey air. The guard beside you grins. "That sound keeps me awake," he says. "Better than prayer sometimes." You smile back, understanding the kind of humour that's born of monotony. Oddly enough, there are tales of entire sieges that lasted through the deep winter. Fires would be burned constantly, snow would be piled high against the ladders, and both sides would suffer in equal measure. Chroniclers describe icicles hanging from helmets, frozen bread that was too hard to eat, and the eerie silence that would fall when arrows stuck fast in the snow instead of striking wood. The image feels almost unreal, yet its quiet horror just lingers. The captain of the guard appears beside you. He leans on the parapet, scanning the white fields. His voice carries easily in the thin air. "The world looks peaceful," he says, "but peace is a lie told by distance. Someone out there is already planning for the spring." He turns away, leaving his words behind him like smoke. As dusk deepens, the men retreat indoors. The armory is glowing orange from the forge, where the blacksmith is shaping new arrowheads. The sound of the hammer on the anvil fills the air, as steady as a heartbeat. Outside, the snow begins again, soft flakes falling into the traces of footprints until even those are gone. You walk back toward the keep. The great doors close with a deep thud, sealing the warmth inside. For now, the world beyond can wait. Yet you know that in every castle across the land, someone else is drawing maps by candlelight, whispering of borders and honor, pretending that the winter will hold still forever. You pass the hall where the children are laughing, the kitchen where the pots are simmering, the chapel where the candles are burning. Life continues, even under the shadow of a potential war. That is the quiet miracle of these walls. No matter what waits beyond them, people find ways to stay alive, to plan, to hope. Outside, the wind changes direction. It carries the faint scent of snow mixed with smoke, like the breath of a sleeping dragon. You pause, listening to the castle's silence, and you understand why medieval chroniclers so often called peace a season, not a promise. Winter might slow down the conflict, but it never truly ended it. The wind has eased by morning, leaving the castle blanketed in a deep stillness. The snow in the courtyard is glowing faintly blue in the early light, completely unbroken, except for a single trail of footprints that's leading toward the gatehouse. You follow them and find the porter unlocking the small side door to admit some travelers. The hinges groan softly. Beyond the gate, 3 figures are waiting with frost, clinging to their cloaks and their beards. They bow quickly, grateful to be allowed inside. Visitors are rare in the deep of winter, but they arrive all the same. Some of them come out of necessity, others out of desperation. The first man looks like a merchant. His cart is creaking behind him, half buried in the snow. The second is a pilgrim carrying a wooden staff that's been wrapped with strips of cloth. The third is a young woman leading a tired mule. Her face is hidden by her hood, her breath rising up like smoke. The steward greets them in the outer hall. His tone is cautious but courteous. Hospitality is both a duty and a risk. Every guest means another mouth to feed, but to turn them away would stain the castle's honor. He asks for their names and their business, while the servants take their cloaks and beat the snow from their boots. Chroniclers of medieval customs tell us that the art of hosting strangers was as carefully observed as any law. Castles served not only as fortresses but as havens for travellers when the roads froze over and the inns were all closed. The great hall became a crossroads of stories and survival. A guest's manners and the lord's generosity were all part of the same ancient dance. The merchant presents a letter of introduction from a nearby town and bows deeply. He offers some small gifts, a pouch of saffron, a roll of fine wool, a pot of honey that's been sealed in wax. The steward accepts them with a nod and orders hot ale to be brought out. The merchant's eyes brighten at the sight of the fire, and he holds his hands out toward it, as though he's worshipping it. The pilgrim kneels briefly, murmuring a blessing. His journey has taken months, he explains. He's seeking the shrine of a local saint who was rumored to protect travelers. His sandals are patched with scraps of cloth, and his staff is trembling slightly in his hands. The steward just nods and promises him a place near the kitchen fire for the night. The young woman removes her hood at last. Her hair is damp with melted snow. She introduces herself as a minstrel, saying she carries songs instead of letters. Her voice is soft but confident. The steward smiles, recognizing an old opportunity. Music in exchange for warmth. He instructs a servant to bring her to the hall after supper. A curious entry in one household ledger lists the varied guests of a single winter. Monks, traders, a wounded soldier, even a travelling falconer. Some of them stayed for a night, others for an entire season. Their presence turned isolation into connection. Each arrival carried with it whispers of the wider world. You can sense that this castle is no different. By evening, the great hall fills up again with sound. The fire is crackling high and the smell of roasted meat is drifting through the air. The lord and lady are sitting at the high table while the guests and the household members are all mingling down below. The minstrel is tuning her small harp, her fingers moving lightly across the strings. A hush falls over the room as she begins to play. Her song tells of a city far to the south where the winter never reaches and the sea smells of oranges. Her voice rises slowly, clear and warm. For a few minutes, everyone completely forgets the cold. Even the servants pause in their work, smiling at the melody. When she finishes, the silence that follows feels like reverence. Then come the cheers and the laughter, quick and full of life. Oddly enough, some castles kept a special room called the Stranger's Chamber, which was reserved for unexpected visitors. It was often located near the gate, both for convenience and for caution. You peek into such a chamber later that night. The merchant is sleeping soundly under a wool blanket. The pilgrim is praying quietly by the fire, his lips moving in rhythm with the flames. The minstrel is humming to herself while she unbraids her hair. The space smells of damp wool and wood smoke, yet it feels almost holy, like a pocket of shared humanity. Historians still debate whether such hospitality was truly generous or merely transactional. Some see it as a religious duty rooted in the Christian command to shelter the stranger. Others view it as politics, a way for lords to maintain their networks of loyalty and influence. Perhaps it was both, intertwined like the threads of the tapestries that are hanging in the hall. You step back out into the corridor and hear faint voices through the stone. The minstrel is teaching the kitchen boys a chorus, their laughter rising up in bursts. Down the hall, a guard is retelling a traveller's story about wolves that follow armies across frozen rivers. The sound of living words carries warmth farther than any fire ever could. Before going to sleep, the steward walks the corridors to check on the guests. He moves quietly, stopping by each door. His lantern casts a soft pool of light that just fades as he moves away. The castle rests easier, knowing that its visitors are safe. For kindness, even in small acts, is what keeps fear from creeping in. Outside, the wind stirs again. The snow begins to fall in slow spirals, catching the torchlight as it drifts. Inside, you can still hear the faint echo of the minstrel's song, as soft as breath. It tells of far-off lands, of roads that do not freeze, of mornings when the light feels warm against the skin. The melody fades into silence, leaving behind a sense of calm so deep that for once the castle seems to be dreaming right along with its people. By the next dawn, the castle is quiet again, wrapped in a hush that feels almost deliberate. You follow the faint smell of hay and damp straw toward the lower courtyard, where the sounds of animals are replacing the murmur of human voices. The stables and the kennels form a world of their own, full of warmth, motion, and the deep, earthy rhythm of breath. The stable doors open with a low creak. Inside, the air feels warmer, thick with the smell of horses, leather, and the smoke from the groom's lanterns. A grey mare stamps softly in her stall, shaking the snow from her mane. Steam is rising from her body in slow curls. A groom is patting her neck, murmuring to her with the tenderness of an old friend. You realize that in winter, the animals are both labourers and lifelines. Their warmth a part of the castle's beating heart. Archaeological finds and written accounts all agree that the stables in fortified castles were often better insulated than the servants' rooms. Thick walls, low ceilings, and all that shared breath kept them warmer than the grand halls up above. Some lords even walked through the stalls at night to check on their prized horses, wrapping them in woolen blankets and feeding them dried oats that had been soaked in ale to keep up their strength. You move deeper into the stable. The floor is covered in straw that crunches beneath your boots. In one corner, two boys are shoveling manure into baskets, working quickly before the cold can stiffen their fingers. They're laughing as they work, teasing each other about whose stall smells worse. The air is thick but alive, filled with the steady sounds of snorts, stamping hooves, and rustling straw. There was a curious practice that was mentioned in an old French record, which describes grooms burning bundles of dried herbs to mask the odour and to purify the air. The smoke is rising now from a small pot in the centre of the room, carrying the scents of thyme and juniper. You cough once, then you smile as the sharp fragrance cuts through the heaviness. The animals seem calmer for it too, their ears twitching lazily. In the next chamber, a farrier is working beside a glowing forge. The rhythmic clang of the hammer on the iron fills the space. Sparks jump and then fade against the damp walls. He's shaping a horseshoe carefully, dipping it into a barrel of water where it hisses like an angry serpent. The smell of hot metal mixes with the hay and the ash, creating an aroma that is both harsh and comforting. His hands are rough, his arms steady. The cold bites the hooves as much as it bites the hands, he says, not even looking up. Outside, the kennels lie against the inner wall of the bailey. The hounds inside are barking softly when you approach, their tails thudding against the wooden pens. A huntsman is kneeling, scratching the ears of a massive mastiff whose fur shines like iron. These dogs are both protectors and companions, bred to guard the gate and to chase down the wolves that wander too close. One of them yawns wide, revealing teeth as white as frost. Written chronicles describe how noble families prized their dogs almost as highly as their horses. They were fed better than most of the peasants, their collars sometimes decorated with silver or bells. You can hear those bells now, a faint, cheerful music beneath the huff of the animal's breath. The huntsman chuckles. "They eat more meat than I do," he says, and you believe him. A small door leads from the kennels to the granary where the castle stores feed for both the animals and the humans. The air smells of dust and grain. Mice are skittering along the rafters, quick and confident. The castle's cats earn their keep in here. You spot one, a slender tabby, stalking with perfect patience before it pounces into the shadows. A brief squeak and then silence. The cat glances at you as if it's demanding admiration before it vanishes into the hay. Historians still discuss how animals shaped the daily rhythm of castle life. Some argue they were simply tools for survival. Others say that they formed deep emotional bonds with the people who tended them. Watching the groom whisper to his horse and the huntsman pat his dogs, it feels impossible to separate one truth from the other. In this cold world, every little bit of warmth was shared. The stable master enters, a large man with a beard that's rimed in frost. He inspects each stall with a quiet authority. His job is as important as the stewards up in the main keep. Without his care, the castle's transport, its hunting, and even its defense could falter. He stops to check the hay, tests the oats with a handful, and then nods approvingly. "Still dry," he says. "That's a good omen." A faint superstition lingers among the staff. They believe that if a horse sneezes twice before sunrise, it means fair weather is on the way. When one of the mares does exactly that, the boys cheer softly. The stable master pretends not to believe it, but his smile gives him away. As you linger near the door, a thin ray of sunlight breaks through the clouds. It glances off the polished metal of the harnesses and turns the frost on the rafters into a shimmer of silver. The horses shift, restless but content. The dogs lie down again, their tails curled up to their chests. The smell of hay and warm breath fills the space completely. Oddly enough, castles sometimes housed exotic animals as gifts or as symbols of prestige. Chronicles have mentioned pet falcons in the solar, tame deer in the courtyards, and once even a small bear cub that was kept by a northern lord who claimed it brought him luck. No one in this castle keeps such creatures, but the gossip about them travels far, adding a touch of wonder to the long winters. As the afternoon deepens, the farrier quenches his last piece of iron and hangs his tools up neatly. The grooms finish their chores and lean against the stalls, exchanging stories about spring hunts that feel impossibly far away. The warmth of their work has left their faces flushed, their eyes bright. The animals have settled into a steady breathing, their movements slow and peaceful. You stand quietly for a moment, just listening. The sounds of the stable, the snorts, the sighs, the faint jingle of the harness rings, they form a rhythm that's older than the castle itself. Here, among creatures that neither scheme nor command, the winter feels less cruel. It becomes a shared endurance, a pact between man and beast to wait for the thaw together. When you step back out into the courtyard, the cold feels sharper, cleaner. Behind you, the muffled noises of the stable continue like a heartbeat under layers of snow. The castle may guard its treasures in stone, but its truest warmth, you think, lives in the breath of its animals. Evening falls without any ceremony, swallowing the last bit of colour from the sky. Inside the castle, the torches are lit one by one, their flames quivering against the stone. Smoke curls lazily up toward the rafters, blending with the faint haze of the cooking fires and the candle soot. You can almost taste the air, thick with the memory of every single fire that has ever burned within these walls. The silence that settles afterward is not empty, but weighted, a kind of quiet that's filled with endurance. You wander through a corridor that feels longer at night, the sound of your steps echoing into the darkness. The castle sleeps in fragments. A servant is snoring near the kitchen door. A guard clears his throat outside the gatehouse. A dog pads past, its eyes reflecting the candlelight. The rhythm of life slows down, but it never fully stops. From descriptions that have been preserved in travellers' journals, we know that winter nights in castles were some of the most difficult hours of the season. The heat from the fires would fade quickly once the wood turned to embers, and draughts would creep through every single crack. The stone walls would breathe the cold back into the rooms, a slow exhale that reached even the highest chambers. People just learned to live within it, rather than against it. A curious habit that's often mentioned in such accounts involves people sleeping in pairs or in groups for warmth, even among servants who might have barely spoken to one another by day. The night stripped away all the rank and formality. Bodies shared heat because survival cared nothing for titles. You can just imagine the long rows of pallets lined with straw, the muffled rustle of blankets, the occasional sigh or whisper as people drifted toward uneasy dreams. The air grows denser as you climb the stairs to the upper floor. Up here, the walls are darkened from all the candle smoke. Soot smudges the edges of the frescoes, softening their colours into muted browns and greys. It's strange how smoke seems to be both a mark of life and of decay at the same time. It stains everything it touches, yet without it all the warmth would just vanish completely. In the great hall, only a few embers are still glowing. The shadows stretch tall across the floor. A single servant is moving silently, poking the coals and covering them with ash to keep them alive until morning. The faint hiss of the settling wood sounds like a breath. He pauses, glances upward at the beams where the light barely reaches, and then crosses himself quickly before leaving. It's not fear that drives the gesture, but habit, the small prayers of those who live so close to the unknown. Some historians believe that the long darkness of winter affected more than just the body. It shaped the mood, the thoughts, even faith. In these months, people spoke often of spirits or omens that would visit them during their sleepless hours. Others say these tales were simply ways of naming their loneliness. Either way, the imagination filled what the light could not reach. You pause by a narrow window slit looking out into the courtyard. The world outside lies silver and utterly still. The moon is glancing off the snow, turning every surface into pale glass. Smoke is drifting from a single chimney, wavering in the breeze. No sound breaks the stillness except for the faint creak of timber. The beauty of it is stark and a little sad, like a song that's sung under one's breath. A maid passes behind you, carrying a candle that's shielded by her hand. Her shadow moves along the wall beside her, large and gentle. She nods as she passes. The smell of tallow and wax lingers in her wake, sweet but faintly acrid. You follow her steps until she disappears behind a door. Inside that chamber, several servants are sitting near a brazier, mending clothes and whispering stories to keep themselves awake. Their laughter is soft and careful. They're talking about summer, about the markets and the rivers, about the taste of berries. Each memory glows for a moment, bright against the surrounding grey. Someone begins to hum a tune, the same one you heard days ago in the kitchen. It seems to travel through the air like a thread, connecting every fire, every heartbeat in the castle. Oddly enough, medieval people sometimes hung polished metal discs or bowls near their candles, believing that the reflected light could chase away the darkness that invited misfortune. You notice one now on the wall, warped and shining like a tiny sun. It scatters the candlelight in trembling patterns across the ceiling. The illusion is fragile, but in a place that's ruled by cold and by night, fragility can still be beautiful. The longer you stand here, the more aware you become of the sound. Each whisper, each crack of burning wood feels magnified. The castle at night is humming with its own music, made of breath, of flicker, and of patience. This is the silence of survival, where every soul is just waiting for the dawn, but not wasting the waiting. Experts on medieval psychology suggest that the long winters taught people a strange intimacy with stillness. Without all the distractions, they listened more deeply to the fire, to the footsteps, to each other. Some chroniclers describe this as a season of contemplation, when even the most hardened soldiers grew reflective. You can almost feel it now, that quiet understanding that endurance is an inner art as much as it is an outer act. When the last candle burns low, you make your way toward the small window again. The snow outside is sparkling under the moonlight. The roofs are gleaming pale and the courtyard looks like a frozen sea. Somewhere deep below, a horse snorts softly. Somewhere higher up, a prayer bell chimes faintly, marking midnight. You close your eyes for a moment and just listen. The air smells of soot and a faint pine from the torches. The warmth on your face is coming not from a flame, but from an awareness, from standing inside a world that refuses to surrender its light to the cold. You understand why people filled these walls with laughter, with song, and with stories. Without them, the winter wouldn't simply chill the body, it would silence the heart. When you open your eyes again, the embers are nearly gone. The hall feels timeless, poised between sleep and waking. You take one slow breath and imagine the hundreds of winters this castle has endured, each one leaving behind a thin layer of smoke and memory. The air carries them all. Morning arrives quietly, not with brightness, but with a gradual lightening of the sky that just seeps into the grey stone like a sigh. You can feel the shift before you even see it. The air tastes different, faintly soft, tinged with the scent of dampness rather than frost. Somewhere in the distance, a single drip of water falls from the roof, followed by another. The thaw has begun. You walk out into the courtyard and hear the sound that everyone in the castle waits for all winter long. Water. It's trickling down the gutters. It's slipping along the walls. It's dropping from the edges of the battlements in slow, deliberate rhythms. The icicles are hanging like glass daggers, melting at their tips. Each drop lands with a sound as bright as a bell. The grooms are already at work, throwing open the stable doors to let in the air. Steam is rising from the warm breath of the horses as sunlight filters through the cracks. The dogs are barking restlessly, sensing the change. The stable boy laughs and says, "Listen, the world is breathing again." His words echo lightly, filled with a joy that needs no permission. From estate records and letters, we know that the first signs of a thaw brought both relief and anxiety. The melting snow meant new beginnings, but it also meant mud, flooded roads, and a lot of work. The same ice that had kept the food fresh now turned to slush, and all the stores had to be checked before spoilage could set in. Hope and labour arrived hand in hand. The kitchen is bursting with movement. Servants are carrying baskets of onions that are sprouting green shoots, dried beans that are softening in pots of water, and salted meat that needs attention. The air smells rich and sharp. Someone opens a shutter to let in the faint light, and the warmth of the room seems to double. A cook laughs as the breeze touches her face. "Even the wind is kind today," she says. There was a curious old practice, mentioned by chroniclers, that involved holding a small feast to mark the first thaw. It wasn't a grand event, just a shared meal to thank Providence for another survived winter. The servants would bake bread from the last of the stored flour, the Lord would share wine from his private supply, and the chapel bell would ring 3 times in gratitude. You can almost see it beginning to unfold here. In the great hall, the hearth is blazing again, but the mood has changed. The cold no longer feels eternal. Children are running across the floor, laughing as their boots leave muddy prints on the rushes. No one scolds them. Even the steward, who usually guards order like a hawk, is smiling at the sight. The air is just humming with relief. The lady of the castle is standing near the window, watching the melted snow drip from the roofs. She's breathing deeply as though she's inhaling the scent of life itself. Her maid brings a basin of fresh water, newly drawn from the well. It's no longer frozen solid. The lady washes her hands slowly, savouring the simple luxury of water that moves. Experts in medieval environmental history often describe the thaw as a kind of annual resurrection. The sound of running water signalled not only the end of hardship, but the return of trade, letters and connection. Roads became passable again, markets reopened, and travellers carried news once more. The silence of winter broke like a shell, and voices returned to the land. Outside, the moat is beginning to thaw unevenly. Sheets of ice are sliding against one another with soft cracks like glass breaking in slow motion. A duck lands clumsily in the half-open water, sending ripples outward. The guards are watching with amused smiles, one of them whistling a tune. The melody carries across the courtyard, high and clear. A boy brings out a broom to sweep away the slush near the kitchen steps. He's working with a cheerful energy, splashing mud all over his boots. "It smells of earth again," he says, and you realize he's right. The air, though it's still cold, is carrying the first faint scent of soil, that ancient promise of growth. Oddly enough, there were rituals of cleansing that were performed at this time in some castles. The rushes from the floors were replaced completely, the walls were scrubbed with vinegar water, and the beds were aired out for the first time in months. You can catch sight of servants beating blankets in the courtyard, their laughter mixing with the rhythmic thuds. The sound feels like music. In the chapel, the priest is blessing a bowl of melted snow, calling it the water of return. He sprinkles it on the congregation, the droplets shining on their hair. People close their eyes, not because they fear the water, but because they've missed the feeling of something liquid and alive touching their skin. The moment feels small, yet sacred. As midday arrives, the Lord walks through the yard with his steward, inspecting the damage of the season. The roofs are dripping steadily, the walls are darkened with moisture, and the first patches of brown earth are appearing at the base of the tower. He nods approvingly, noting which repairs to begin. His boots sink slightly into the mud, and he laughs. It's a rare sound, full of ease. Historians write that after the first thaw, castle life would accelerate quickly. Markets would be arranged, the livestock would be moved back to the outer pastures, and winter's heavy meals would give way to lighter fare. Even the mood of the conversation changed. Plans that had been whispered over the fires became declarations that were made aloud. Spring wasn't here yet, but hope had already arrived. By late afternoon, sunlight is filtering into places that have known only shadow for months. It's glancing off puddles that are mirroring the sky, catching on droplets hanging from the branches, and painting gold streaks on the damp stone. Children are chasing reflections across the ground while a maid laughs, her voice carrying above the splash of water. As evening falls, the hall fills up once more, but the fire now feels like a celebration rather than a defense. The walls are shimmering faintly with moisture, reflecting the light in soft halos. The air is carrying the mingled scent of wet wood, smoke, and bread baking somewhere nearby. Everyone is moving more freely, as though the castle itself has begun to exhale. You stand near the doorway, watching the faces around the fire. They are the same people who endured the long silence, yet their eyes seem different now, lighter, filled with a quiet triumph. In their laughter, you can hear a gratitude that's been disguised as joy. The world outside is still cold, but the promise of change has already touched these walls. The first thaw has come, and with it, the castle remembers how to breathe. The days are growing longer, though the cold is still lingering in the corners of the castle, like an old guest who's reluctant to leave. The fires are still burning, but less fiercely now, their light turning from survival to comfort. At night, the great hall fills not only with warmth, but with voices that are telling stories. This is the hour when the past comes alive in the shimmer of the embers, and you settle in close enough to listen. A bard has returned from the road, his cloak dusty from his travels, his harp polished but worn along the edges. He's sitting on a low stool near the hearth, tuning his strings with careful fingers. The people are gathering around, servants and nobles alike. No one minds the mingling of ranks tonight. Storytelling is the one art that belongs to everyone. From letters and household accounts, we know that on winter evenings tales would replace the sunlight. They warmed the imagination when the body couldn't be comforted by heat alone. Minstrels, pilgrims, and wandering monks carried stories from one castle to another, sewing together the scattered world of medieval Europe with words instead of roads. The bard begins softly, his voice low and rough from the cold air. He tells of a knight who rode into a snowstorm seeking a lost child, and found instead a spirit of the frost who offered him a choice between life and courage. The listeners are leaning closer. The firelight is flickering over their faces, and you can see their expressions shift with the story's rhythm. A curious record from a northern monastery mentions that people believed that the stories themselves carried power, that speaking them aloud could drive away misfortune. Words were charms and the listeners were participants. You can feel it now, that shared stillness that binds everyone together, as though their combined attention itself is what's keeping the winter from creeping back in. The bard's tale grows darker. He describes the night's struggle against the ice wind, the horse sinking in the snow, the child's cry echoing across the moors. The listeners fall silent. Then his voice softens again. The spirit releases the knight after he gives away his cloak to save the child. The fire snaps loudly at that moment, almost as if it approves. The bard ends with a quiet chord, and the room exhales as one. A servant brings the bard a cup of ale. He drinks, wipes his mouth, and then begins another story, this one lighter. It tells of a monk who tried to measure the length of winter with a candle, and ended up discovering patience instead. Laughter ripples through the room, the kind that loosens the heart. Historians still argue whether these tales were mostly moral lessons or just simple entertainment. Some see them as remnants of older pagan traditions that were reshaped by a Christian sensibility. Others think they were just the human need for wonder finding a voice. Either way, they turn darkness into meaning, transforming each night into a bridge between endurance and imagination. In one corner, a young woman begins to sing quietly, her melody weaving through the storyteller's pauses. The tune carries a melancholy sweetness, like melted snow running through a harp string. She sings of a saint who tamed wolves with kindness, and of lovers who were separated by frozen rivers. The music drifts upward toward the beams, where the smoke is lingering in lazy spirals. There was a curious medieval superstition that said that stories told by firelight could summon the souls of those who had lived in the same room centuries earlier. People called it the listening hour. No one truly feared it. In fact, they welcomed the thought that their ancestors were leaning in close, drawn by the familiar comfort of voices and warmth. You can almost imagine those unseen guests now standing just beyond the glow, smiling faintly as the living continue their rituals of speech and song. The castle, after all, is full of memories. Every stone has heard both laughter and weeping. Every wall has held echoes for longer than any person's lifetime. The bard pauses again to retune his harp. The fire crackles, throwing sparks up into the air. A child who is sitting near the front asks if ghosts can feel the cold. The room just bursts into laughter. The bard grins and replies, "Only the unfriendly ones." The mood softens. Someone brings more ale. Someone else throws another log onto the fire. And the night just deepens with comfort. Experts who study medieval literature note that oral storytelling preserved not just the myths, but the community itself. Each listener became a guardian of what they had heard. Tomorrow, a servant might repeat one tale to another in the kitchens, and the story would grow a little, twist a little, but it would survive. Memory, just like a fire, needed tending. Outside, the thawing moat is reflecting a thin crescent moon. Inside, the bard is finishing one final song, slow and gentle. His voice is hoarse now, his eyes shining in the dim light. He's singing of spring, waiting beneath the snow, of hearts that keep their color through the longest dark. The refrain is simple, almost like a prayer. All winters end, all fires rise again. When he stops, no one speaks. The silence that follows feels sacred. Then the steward clears his throat softly and thanks him. Coins clink into the bard's cup, but he seems more pleased by the attention than by the payment. He just nods once, smiles at the company, and begins to pack up his harp. The people linger a little longer. Conversations resume in low tones filled with laughter and warmth. You stand quietly, watching the glow of the fire reflect on their faces. The smoke is swirling upward like a ribbon of memory, carrying the last words of the song with it. It's easy to see why people loved these nights. For a few precious hours, the cold outside becomes a backdrop to human sound, not its master. The stories turn fear into beauty, isolation into a gathering. You close your eyes and listen to the murmur of voices, the slow breath of the dying fire, and you realize that this, too, is a kind of prayer. Morning arrives pale and quiet, a grey ribbon of light stretching across the sky. The air still carries a chill, but it no longer bites. You walk through the courtyard, past the melting patches of snow and the puddles that are reflecting the castle walls. Everywhere there are signs of change. The icicles are dripping steadily from the roofs. A guard is leaning on his spear, blinking in the unexpected brightness. Even the stones seem to glisten with a faint sense of relief. Inside the keep, the fires are burning lower now, watched without the urgency of survival. The great hall smells of wax and damp wool, but it also holds something softer: peace. The castle has endured another winter. Life will begin to spill outward soon toward the fields, the forests, and the roads that lead to other lives. For now there is a stillness, but it is the stillness that comes after a struggle, not the kind that's born of fear. You walk slowly through the rooms that have become familiar. The kitchen feels larger now that the smoke has thinned. The healer's chamber smells faintly of drying herbs rather than sickness. The solar is glowing with light that's reflected from the melting snow outside, and the ladies in there are smiling as they unroll bright fabrics that have been stored away since the autumn. The season of endurance is giving way to the season of hope. From household records and chronicles, we know that the passing of winter was more than just a change of weather. It marked a kind of rebirth for those who had survived it. Crops would be planted, marriages would be arranged, and debts would be forgiven. People greeted one another with words of gratitude rather than complaint. The rhythm of life was restarting, just as the rivers and streams had begun to move again. A curious note appears in one account from a Yorkshire manor. It describes how, at the first full thaw, every single member of the household, lords, servants, and even the animals, was sprinkled with water from the well. It was meant to wash away the sleep of winter. You can just imagine the laughter that must have filled the courtyard that day, the shock of the cold drops against warm skin, the sound of joy echoing between the towers. As you pass through the chapel, the priest is preparing for morning prayers. He's lighting candles along the altar and has opened the shutters a little to let the light in. The scent of melted wax and damp stone is mingling with the fresh air. He's humming quietly to himself, a tune that seems neither solemn nor festive, but simply content. You realize that faith, just like the fire, has survived another season. Historians often write that the endurance of medieval people was rooted in rhythm rather than in resistance. They accepted the turning of the year as part of a larger story, one that they did not control but that they belonged to. The cold would come again, as it always did. Yet they would face it with the same blend of patience and habit that had kept them alive before. In that sense, the castle itself feels like a mirror of the human spirit, strong, imperfect, always waiting for the next beginning. You pause by the gate where the porter is oiling the hinges to keep them from rusting. His hands are rough and sure. He looks up and says, "It will be spring soon," as though the thought alone could make it happen. You nod, knowing that he's right. Beyond the walls, the world will wake up slowly, one green shoot at a time. The castle's animals can sense it too. The horses are whinnying softly, eager for open ground. The hounds are barking at shadows that are no longer menacing. The cats are stretching lazily in the sunlight that's spilling through the open door. Life, always practical, is wasting no time in returning. Oddly enough, one old superstition claimed that castles could remember their winters. People said that when the first thunder of spring rolled across the hills, you could hear the walls creak as if they were exhaling. Standing here now, you almost believe it. The wind that slips through the courtyard carries the faint scent of thawed earth, and somewhere a bird is singing for the first time in months. The sound feels fragile but defiant. As evening settles in again, the people are gathering in the hall for one last night beside the winter fire. The flames are crackling softly, reflecting in every cup and every eye. The talk is easy now, plans for planting, for repairs, for weddings. Someone mentions a fair in a nearby town and laughter fills the air. You sit among them, listening, and you feel a warmth that has nothing to do with wood or with flame. It strikes you then that the castle's endurance is not a story of its walls, but of the hearts within them. The people who live here have learned how to turn hardship into routine, routine into comfort, and comfort into gratitude. They have faced the longest nights and found ways to fill them with song and laughter. They have built their strength not in defiance of winter, but in partnership with it. Outside, the stars are appearing one by one, reflected faintly in the wet stones of the courtyard. The last of the snow is gleaming under their light. You close your eyes for a moment and listen to the hush of the wind around the towers. The cold is fading, but its memory lingers gently. A reminder of everything that was endured and everything that will return. The castle stands still, timeless, breathing softly with its people. Its walls hold both the echoes of struggle and the promise of renewal. In the quiet between the seasons, you understand what survival truly means. Here, it is not a victory over nature, but a harmony with it, a long conversation between fire and frost, between faith and patience, between silence and song. And as you step away from the hall, the wind follows you through the gate, mild now, touched with warmth. The stars brighten, the snow drips, and somewhere within the stone, you almost feel the castle itself beginning to smile. You rest by the last embers of the fire, the hall dim and calm all around you. The voices have faded, the laughter gone quiet, leaving only the soft hiss of the wood as it settles into ash. The air feels tender now, like a lullaby you don't have to hear to understand. Outside, the night is holding the castle gently, its silence no longer heavy but protective. You imagine the people asleep in their chambers, wrapped in furs that still smell faintly of smoke and herbs. The hounds are sighing in their sleep, the horses are shifting in their stalls, the children are dreaming of green fields. The cold still lingers, yet it feels harmless now, softened by the knowledge that morning will come. The stones around you hold centuries of warmth. You can feel it under your fingertips, faint but alive, like the pulse of a great slow heart. Everything that has been endured has become a part of the castle's memory. The laughter, the prayers, the silence, the patience, it's all stored here, folded into the quiet. Outside, the stars are shimmering over the melting snow, and a faint breeze slips through the open door. It carries the smell of damp earth, of a change that is waiting just beyond the horizon. You close your eyes and breathe deeply. The air feels new again. When you open them, the fire has almost gone out, leaving only a soft glow. The light is flickering across the stone walls, tracing the same patterns it has for hundreds of years. You smile because you know that somewhere deep in the castle, another fire is already being lit. Rest now. The world is turning gently, and you are safe within its rhythm. Sleep well and dream of warmth returning